Hi everyone, this is Haley from Castle Audios, and welcome to the Glenwood Season 1 recap. We just finished up with Alternate Universe August, which was very, very fun. I had an absolute blast with these last couple of audios. But now that August has come and gone, and we are now in September, we gotta get back into Glenwood. But since the start of the channel, a lot of stuff has happened. Quite a bit, about 63 audios worth of stuff. And whether you've been with the channel since the very first couple of audios before Glenwood was even a thing, or if you only just recently discovered my channel and you're navigating your way through all of these characters and plot lines and all of that nonsense, this is the perfect audio for you because we just need a little refresher. A quick little overview of everything that's happened, all the characters we've met, all the characters we've heard about, all the stuff that they've done and gone through, and how we've gotten from being pinned against the wall to being blown up at a ranger station. With plenty of comfort audios in the middle. So yes, this is what I like to call a low stakes audio. I am quite literally plopped on the ground in my recording booth. I'm not even standing at the desk. I've got my content page of my YouTube studio up, and I am just going to go through every single audio in the Glenwood playlist from Beth's first audio to the good lord, to the most recent Claire audio where we got to meet Valera. And if this little blurb didn't clue you in, obviously this is going to be a very long audio, a very detailed audio. I'm just going to roll with it. So whatever flubs I happen to have, whatever awkward pauses of me breathing there might be, there's going to be minimal editing in this one. So this will be perfect for all of you guys who put my audios on just to listen and do your own work, or if you want a sleep aid or just have someone babbling incessantly in the background. I'm your gal for this audio. I also apologize. I'm a little nervous. I don't usually talk to you guys for longer than 5 minutes out of character. So without the shroud of very aggressive werewolves or manipulative vampires or completely innocent and not at all spicy girlfriends, I'm a little nervous, so if you'll forgive me for that. What else should I say before we get going? For this kind of overview, I will do my best to be referring to the listeners all in the third person, so referring to them all as they, them, to maintain the gender inclusivity. Also, so it's not confusing whenever we get to audios where there are multiple listeners, and I'm not just saying, you talked to you for however many times. Yeah, I think we're good to go. That's a pretty simple concept that I'm just dragging out for no reason. We're already at almost 4 minutes, good God. Without further ado, Glenwood Season 1, the full audio recap. And take 75. So, at the very beginning of Glenwood, very start of the playlist, our very first listener character, the Seer, is coming home after a long night at work, gets in the door, not even 4 seconds in, is thrown against the wall and has a hand on their neck. That is where we meet Bethany Annalise Taylor, our lovely, hot-headed beta werewolf, who mistakenly, after a very long hunt, walked into the wrong house in her neighborhood because her and her pack just moved in. Good God, the way that I'm talking, I really am nervous. So Beth and her pack had just moved into town, they're still getting settled, and Beth got confused with the backyards and the houses and accidentally walked into the Seer's living room and thought that the Seer was an intruder. Obviously, Beth feels awful about the mistake and is a little embarrassed, especially doctor having to call her Alpha to let her know where she is. But eventually she asks the seer out to coffee to make up for it in what is definitely not a date. As a little teaser at the very end of the audio, the seer has a vision. And while Beth is talking about her pack moving in, we get a glimpse of Beth moving in boxes and referring to the seer's books and where they should put them. And we get kind of a clue into what the seer and Beth's future is going to be later down the line. So that is a quick little intro to Bethany. We also get a clue as to what Beth's nickname for the listener is going to be, because at the very end of the audio she says, "See you around, beautiful." And they are very beautiful, and so are you. Going back a few days later, we check back in with Bethany. Beth is meeting the seer for coffee. They sit down, they chat, they really get to know each other. The seer has lived in Glenwood for quite a few years. Beth has only moved in just a couple months ago, so she's still getting acclimated and wants to know more about the person she accidentally assaulted. The two joke around, they have a good time. Beth finds out that seer had a Greek mythology phase where in their childhood they named their cat Cassandra after the cursed prophet. So we learn a little more about the seer's personality. And they ultimately have a really good time together. Beth makes her first friend in Glenwood. Around the same time, in another corner of the country, the latest listener character wakes up after experiencing a car accident. Now, they don't remember the accident or what happened before then. All they know is that they have woken up to this very concerned vampire hovering above them, absolutely worried sick for their well-being. She introduces herself as Rochelle and explains that she pulled them out of the wreck and healed their wounds and is now very concerned that if they are okay. And through various means of miscommunication at first, Rochelle reveals that Doll, the listener, is a blood mage. Now, obviously, Doll did not realize that they had any magic until Rochelle kind of coaxes it out of them through some manipulation of her own. They're left with plenty of questions that Rochelle promises to answer, but before she can, she hears sirens and the ambulance is coming, and she can't be seen for obvious reasons. So she promises Doll that she will find them at a later date and explain everything. But as long as they're okay, she needs to leave. So she vanishes, Doll is taken to the hospital and brought back home to ponder this new revelation about their supposed powers. Not technically in Glenwood, but adjacent to Glenwood, the listener, Dear, or whatever random listener, not particularly Dear, but it could have been, I don't know, it's up to listener interpretation. They tune in to their favorite cryptid podcaster, Abigail's Cryptid Tales, as she goes on to explain that she is going to be moving. She's recently found an apartment in this very, very peculiar town called Glenwood. Now, we don't know where Glenwood is state-wise for, various reasons. But we learn that Glenwood has kind of an odd history of vanishing off of maps. If Abby happened to be glancing at a map or on the internet, Glenwood might pop up in the corner of her vision and then disappear. Until one day, suddenly it was just there. And there was a listing, and suddenly she just felt drawn, like she had to move here. Very odd thing for a town to do that, and she clues in on that very well because she is a cryptid podcaster and the weird is her specialty. But she makes an audio announcing she'll be moving and she'll be heading to Glenwood, and that is our introduction to Miss Abigail. A little time passes, and Beth and the seer have gotten much closer together. Now it's to the point where Beth is now hanging over at Seer's apartment. The two of them are watching movies together, getting dinner, And we realize that Seer has an absolutely god-awful taste in movies, that no matter how much Beth complains, she never actually takes away their movie-picking privileges. At some point in the evening, Beth asks Seer if they would be willing to go to an event with her at the Pax Den. The two of them chat. Seer teases Beth incessantly. Unfortunately, towards the end of the audio, the Seer notices that Beth has an injury on her ankle. The Seer offers to try to heal it with magic, and while Beth is joking around about, if you don't do it right, you'll take off my foot, the Seer ends up getting a vision. Now, the vision is not nearly as pleasant as their first. This one is filled with panic and confusion as Bethany ends up having a very critical injury. And it cuts out right before, but there's an implication that Bethany's father's life is in danger. The vision ends, Seer's a little shook up, Beth tries to calm them down, and Seer gives them a warning that things at the den might not be entirely safe. They can't really go into much more detail beyond that, but Beth doesn't push. Instead, she just offers to get them a drink, they can settle and watch another movie. Now, if you were told that you have magical abilities, but the only person who could tell you about those abilities was nowhere to be found, you'd be a little stir-crazy too. So, Doll, who, again, has just recently found out that they have magical powers, hasn't heard from Rochelle in quite a while, so they go out to look for her themselves. They go back to the woods where they crashed their car and where they met Rochelle originally, and Rochelle meets them there. Apparently she was waiting for them to come to her. So she tries explaining magic, telling them that they are a blood mage, a magic wielder who is able to control blood, who can sense the magic in another person's blood, who can amplify and dilute the magic. So many wild abilities that Doll doesn't even know where to start with all of this. And Rochelle offers to become their teacher. So she will teach them everything she knows about magic and the world of wielders and all of this. And who is Doll to refuse? So they say yes. Rochelle becomes their instructor, but at the very end insists that they don't tell anyone, to keep it secret for safety reasons. So Rochelle is the only person that Doll can talk to about this now. Which at first seems very generous, keeping them safe, making sure that they are okay, that they have resources, but also that they don't end up ostracizing themselves from their friends or family in general. Back in Glenwood, we are introduced to yet another listener. It's just one listener after the other. Deer, who is what is called an open wielder, a magic user who has a variety of different abilities. It is not just centered on one specialty like elementals or shifters. So Deer walks into the library and meets their new boss, Rose, who is the head librarian at the Glenwood Public Library. Rose is just a few years older than them. She's a little flighty, a little forgetful, but incredibly endearing, and immediately takes to making sure that Deer has everything they could possibly need to further their education and to do what is essentially an internship at the library. They used to go to a magical This would be cut out of the audio, but we're not going to do that. They used to be at a magical institution to learn their powers. However, over time, just the standardized testing of that environment wasn't working for them, so they opted for a personal one-on-one internship with Rose. So Rose is not only tasked with making sure they have a job and has rent money, but also for making sure that they complete their education at a pace that they kind of set for themselves and is comfortable for them as they grow as a magic wielder. So that is Rose. She is absolutely delightful, and she explains everything about magic. We could have a whole audio on the lore of the magic system that I've created in Glenwood. We'll get small bits and pieces as we go on. At the very end of the audio, she does give Deer a library card, which allows them to see all of the books that are inclined specifically towards magic that have all had a glamour spell put on them. So if you're not a magic wielder, you can't see what the books really are. And they'll just have a glaze over them. So if you're looking for romance novels, well, now the magical textbooks look like encyclopedias, and so on and so forth. In the next audio, we are still at the library with Rose, but now Deer is kind of more settled. They've been studying, they're working the front desk, and now we meet Abigail once again. Abby has been living in Glenwood for the last couple of months. There's been a bit of a time skip, but now we realize that Abby has been a regular at the library and has been a regular pain in Rose's neck, however much Rose secretly enjoys it. So we meet Abby, we meet Rose, and the three kind of have a group now. Abby immediately finds the open wielder and is like, you're my friend. We're gonna be best friends now. And Deer just has no choice but to go along with it. Not that they would deny it anyway. So that is the official start of our library trio. Hopping back over to our werewolves, we once again meet with Beth and the seer. The two of them have just gotten back from meeting Beth's father, who is Simon. Now, Simon is... imagine just a cinder block with the thickest eyebrows that gives you the biggest hugs. That's Simon. He works at the butcher's shop in town. He's very good at his job. But Beth has officially introduced Seer to them since he could not come to the den and enjoy the big event that's going on, which Beth and Seer are now walking over to. Now, whenever the pack moved to Glenwood, obviously many of the pack got their own homes, like Beth and her father. However, the pack also purchased an old country club. Now, the country club sits right by the lake, and the property itself is pressed right up against the nature reservation for Glenwood. So the pack has this huge, huge building that has plenty of room for them to shift, for them to have their pack meetings, for them to just, stay over and have a comfortable space. With all this extra space, though, the pack has decided to kind of settle themselves in the community a little bit more by hosting a pet and park event. Regular Glenwood citizens can park their cars, walk around, stop by the local vendors, food trucks, and they have also partnered with local humane societies and animal shelters so that people can maybe adopt a new friend as well. So Beth and the seer are at the event, they're looking around, and almost immediately they meet Ro. Ro is one of the younger members of the pack. They're about 18, 19 at the time of this audio. And they are a quintessential little shit to Beth. Just ultimate little sibling energy. They live for getting on Beth's nerves, and Beth loves to threaten to shave them at any opportunity because she could. So Ro meets the seer, and the two hit it off very well. Ro makes some implications that Beth has not stopped talking about them to the pack ever since the two of them met, which Beth is a little embarrassed by. And rushes them off to help another member of the pack, Tristan, who unfortunately was not able to shift out of his wolf form in time before guests started arriving, so is currently trapped in his wolf form while he is being tormented by a toddler. So Ro goes off to help Tristan, get him inside so that he can shift, and the two of them can kind of go off and do their own thing. And now Beth and Seer are left alone to kind of meander the grounds and pet some animals. Eventually Beth wanders over to get some food from one of the food trucks, and while Seer is on their own, they meet Claire. Now, Claire is the alpha of Beth's pack, also Beth's best friend. So she walks up and introduces herself, and Seer is automatically intimidated because if there's anyone you want to impress when making friends with a shifter, it is that shifter's alpha. Despite the Seer being an absolute nervous wreck, Claire just wants to thank them for their warning that they gave about the pack potentially meeting an attack or a threat. During one of their patrols, they had extra scouts out, and they found old poacher traps that still hadn't been triggered, so at any point, one of them could have been seriously injured. So she wants to thank Seer, welcomes them into the pack. By that point, Beth comes back around, and we discover that Beth didn't actually tell the pack how the pair really met. So we get some banter between the three of them. Claire walks off when she realizes that the local park ranger, who has been doing safety checks on the whole event, is now coming over to them, so she tries to intercept and go to the ranger first before they can harass the Seer and Beth. They continue on for the rest of the evening until most of the guests have gone home. Now it's just magic wielders who know that there's kind of an after party. Beth leads the Seer up to the roof of the den, and the two sit side by side together while they watch a fireworks show. And Beth realizes she might be in a little bit of trouble. Oh shit, I lost my place. No! Hang on. My page froze. I don't know what the next audio is. God. Hold please for technical difficulties. If you can't hear my shoulder cracking every 5 seconds. Still haven't gotten that fixed. Oh, I should have guessed that. Okay, well. Endlessly professional. That's us here at Castle Audios, or as CW calls it, Castle Studios. I don't know what that is, but, apparently we work for the corporation that is Castle Audios. Alright. Getting back into it. Some time passes and the local park ranger comes back to the den because they are a bit of a busybody. They have an overwhelming dedication to their job, so they come back to the den to have interrogation with Claire. Obviously, Claire has dealt with them on numerous occasions, so she is not that happy to see them. The two of them bicker, they banter, and at some point, Ranger points out that Claire's family hunts. So, after a little bit more arguing, Claire brings them down to their walk-in freezer in the basement, where, yes, they have meats hanging, they have all the storage, namely because, yes, the pack does hunt, and the meat that they, catch goes to Simon, who sells it at the butcher shop, and whatever they don't sell, they give to various different causes, like bones go to local, witches, those who practice, who actually have, a collection of bones. But unfortunately, when they go into the freezer, Ranger does not realize that there is no handle on the inside of the door, and when they close it, they're locked inside. So the two argue a little bit more. Claire scooches them off to the back of the freezer. She works a little bit of magic, gets them out. And as she escorts Ranger out to the door, she slams the door in their face, and we get a perfect glimpse into what their relationship is like, and where their starting place is for where they go for the slowest slow burn of this entire series. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, I didn't mention this in the description for the Penn Park event, but during that audio, Claire and Beth had kind of a short conversation about someone texting them, giving them updates. We didn't really have a lot of information on that. Now we do as we come around to discovering your girlfriend is a vampire. Now the audio opens up with the listener, Knight, or Sweetheart, listening through voicemails that they have from their girlfriend, Genevieve. And they range from just regular, hey, call me back when you have a minute, to a more worrying conversation about them being in court. And then finally we go from a New Year's celebration of declarations of love and excitement to Genevieve has woken up after being attacked by a vampire. She can't go outside, she's hungry, she doesn't know what to do, and she lives about a 2 days drive away from Glenwood. She lives where the pack used to live because she hasn't made the move over to Glenwood yet. She had plans to after her lease was up, but up until this point that hadn't happened yet, and she stayed in their old hometown, but now needs to get out. So the audio opens with Night driving to Genevieve and finding her in her apartment with her the curtains drawn. She's hiding in her bedroom, and Night brings her 2 jars of blood that Claire has provided. Obviously, this is a very angst-ridden audio and one of the saddest introductions to a character. But Genevieve drinks the blood. She's able to kind of calm herself down. The two have a reunion. And Night decides then and there that Genevieve is coming to Glenwood with them. So they load Genevieve up in the car. They put sheets over the windows of the car so that even if she is a vampire, she can't be in direct sunlight. They drive mostly during the evenings. They sleep in hotels during the day. And because it is relatively covered, she can be in a car during dawn and dusk. But once it gets to, like, proper daylight hours, they do need to pull off and get her under some cover. So, yes, Night is overridden with guilt about letting this happen to Genevieve, even though this had nothing to do with them. Genevieve would have been turned regardless, whether they were there or not. After that, we return back to Beth and Beautiful, and this audio opens up with the seer kind of overloading their powers, running through vision after vision, trying to look for any potential future that they could give a warning to Beth and her pack. Now, Beth catches them doing this and is not too happy that the seer is kind of overworking themselves now to the point that they have a migraine, they are now getting sick. Sorry, that's my water bottle. Hang on. We're almost at 30 minutes in. If you haven't taken some water yet, you should probably get some water. Have you had water today? It's not enough. It's not enough. Go get more. If you think you've had enough water, you haven't. You should get more. And a snack. You should get water and a snack while we're doing this. Good. So yes, it takes a little bit of convincing, but Beth eventually gets Seer to crawl in bed, get some food in their stomach, and Beth takes the liberty and shifts in front of them and kind of wraps around them as a big living blanket to make sure that they stay in bed. Because at this point we kind of figured they're not going to keep their ass in bed unless Beth is quite literally holding them down so they rest. But yes, if Beth thought she was in... Beth? Good lord. If Beth thought she was in trouble beforehand, this audio just kind of confirms that she is most certainly catching feelings for our dear Seer. And because we love consistency on this channel, we are going from Beth back to Rochelle once again. So more time has passed. Doll and Rochelle are training. Doll is getting a firmer grip on their abilities and how to master their powers under Rochelle's instructions. Unfortunately, this particular training session ends with Doll losing control of their abilities and sending Rochelle flying across the room, which, well deserved. Anywho, they take a break, and Doll starts voicing their concerns about, Rochelle's intentions. You don't give something if not to get something back. And Rochelle assures them that she is doing this because Doll has a very rare magic type. Not many blood mages still exist in the world. It is important that they understand and learn their abilities for their safety and for the continuation of this magic. Doll's still a little unsure, so in this audio we get kind of more lore about vampires in general. So we learned that vampires, while they are able to trance humans, they can control them, they can look into their minds, they can alter their memories if necessary. The same is not true for blood mages. Blood mages are immune to vampire trancing. They're immune to vampire trancing, the thrall, and the lure. Now, the lure is just kind of a general ambiance around vampires that kind of draws you in and makes it easier for them to find, not really a better name for it than prey. The thrall is what kind of lulls them into a false sense of security. So kind of eases any anxiety and makes them more susceptible to the full-on trance, which is the full control of mind and body. Doll is completely immune to that. Rochelle couldn't turn them if she tried, and if Rochelle tried to feed from them, she assures that she would not be able to gain any of Doll's powers. Vampires cannot take the magical powers of another through their blood. Either they take a little bit of blood or drain them completely. Magical transference is not a thing. So they don't have to worry about that. Rochelle is not trying to use them for a meal ticket. She wants them to preserve their blood as much as they possibly can while they are learning and while they are growing in their abilities. It is also during this audio that we learn, and it is confirmed, a lot of people guessed it after her second audio, but we learn that Rochelle used to be a blood mage. She was born a blood mage, she was a very powerful blood mage, but unfortunately, much like Genevieve was, Rochelle was attacked one evening by a vampire and turned as a result of this attack. This led to her losing all of her magical abilities. She is no longer considered a blood mage in the general sense. She's a vampire with vampiric magic and vampiric abilities. None of her blood magic transferred over during the turning. So her finding Doll is like a second chance at the life that she lost. So being able to guide Doll and take them through this journey of exploring their powers and learning about magic in general, it's a new, like I said before, second chance. And it is something that she is desperate to cling on to, and why she is so insistent on Doll learning and keeping up with this training. They call it quits for that evening, but Doll gets a sense that there is something much bigger going on that Rochelle isn't telling them, but just kind of feels grateful to, be part of this magical world. At least that's what Rochelle hopes they are. Back in Glenwood, we are in the library with Dear and Abigail, who has basically become like a permanent resident there. She's basically just made the library her second home as she lovingly harasses Dear at work. The two chat, they're hanging out, they're having a good time. The open wielder ends up asking Abby what her thoughts on magic are, since she has a podcast completely dedicated to myths, legends, cryptozoology, all that, and Abby gives her explanation that while she doesn't believe in, magic wands and flying carpets, she believes in the smaller things, the magic of nature, of human connection, of the mythos that are created through the human experience, and the magic that is emulated through stories we tell each other and that are passed down from generation to generation. That is her vision of what real magic is. This was personally like one of my favorite audios to make, but we kind of get a glimpse into Abby's perspective as someone who doesn't realize that magic is a reality through the lens of someone who is currently studying to wield magic at the tips of her fingers. So that is all very, very fun. Sorry, I'm scrolling on my laptop to get to the next video because this was still early on in the channel when I was doing script fills. Okay. We once again round back over to Genevieve and Knight. Genevieve has now settled, not at the Pax Den, but instead at the estate of one Miss Celine Avaros. Celine Avaros is a vampire, or vampire prime, as she is over 600 years old. She's one of the oldest vampires on this side of the hemisphere, probably one in the world. And she has a very large estate just in the outskirts of Glenwood, where Genevieve is staying to recuperate amongst people who are, also, bloodsuckers. Knight has been routinely coming in to check on her, making sure she's okay, she's acclimating, getting her whatever she could possibly need. But this audio is just them spending time together, being close and intimate as Genevieve comes to terms with the fact that she is no longer human. She has powers now. She has red eyes. She has fangs. And she is very nervous to kiss her partner now because she doesn't know how to control said fangs. Not that Knight minds. But the two just have a moment together to kind of reestablish their relationship and kind of reinforce that they are going to be together and that they are going to handle this, whatever may come, at each other's sides. On a less sweet note, at the ranger station where our beloved park ranger works alongside a very lovely woman named Diane, Claire arrives in the morning to drop off paperwork because now that the pack has successfully had the Pet and Park event, now the pack would like to host a fall festival for Halloween. So a very similar concept with decorations, vendors, food trucks, all that fun stuff that everyone loves in the fall time. So she drops off the paperwork, and the ranger lets her know that the poachers who had been leaving traps around her pack's property were caught, were arrested, and were immediately let out on bail. Obviously, Claire is not happy about this, and she takes out that anger on Ranger, who snaps right back. The two have a disagreement, as per usual, but eventually they kind of agree to disagree that the situation's bad, it's annoying. Claire obviously has much more pressing matters that are, weighing down on her, like the fact that her pack routinely does hunts and patrols and just goes for runs up in those woods that have poacher traps scattered throughout, and now have three poachers with a score to settle who are now free. So that stress is making her take her frustration out on Ranger, and Ranger is just trying to do their job. But the two settle things out, and of course the two try to go at each other's throats at every opportunity, as one always does at the start of a romance. A little bit of time passes, and we are once again back in the library with our open wielder, who has about 75 books stacked around them like a goddamn fortress. Rose comes over and kind of pulls them off the ledge a little bit, talks them down, because they are clearly overworking themselves and trying to learn literally every single shred of magical knowledge when there's time. They don't have to. There is no pressure to learn everything and to burn themselves out when they can just take things one step at a time, and that's still good enough. Just because you have the potential doesn't mean you need to run yourself into the dirt to achieve it as soon as possible. You can take your time with these kinds of things. So Rose has a very sweet moment with them and comforts them and lets them know that things are going to be okay. And they are. So going back to Bethany and Beautiful, the two have just had a lovely evening together. Clearly they've been spending quite a lot of time together because right now Beth is washing dishes while Seer passes her plates. And they're joking and chatting about how the pack is quite large. So Seer doesn't think they can memorize all the names and remember who's who, so Beth starts giving them a pop quiz of sorts, going through the list of every single pack member, whether we've been introduced to them in the actual story or not. So we hear a bunch of names that we haven't actually met properly yet. And as Seer is going through the list, they wind up saying Alexander. Now, we don't actually hear Alexander at the time, but they say Alexander, and Beth drops the cup that's in her hand, and she immediately starts to panic. She gets defensive and aggressive, because no one in the pack has ever said that name, not out loud and not to Seer. So Beth starts demanding where Seer heard that name, why they know that name, just very panicked and very aggressive all of a sudden. And you realize that the Seer was trying to look into people's past, was trying to learn more about Beth through visions rather than asking her, and wound up hearing the name Alexander, and seeing his image in a photo. So Beth feels incredibly upset by this, but instead of automatically taking all of that out on Seer, she calms herself down in the moment, and she goes for a walk. She leaves with the promise of coming back, just to kind of regulate herself before having any kind of conversation like this. Little bit of a time skip. Eventually Beth comes back, the two sit down, and Beth reveals that Alexander was someone that the pack no longer tolerates or associates themselves with. He is essentially dead to them all. And it is a very painful memory that no one likes to talk about, especially Claire, especially Simon and Beth, who would have been the only people who would have the authority to talk to them about it. So Beth reassures them that she is upset, and she doesn't appreciate having her life looked in on without her consent and without her knowledge. But this is something that she wants to tell them, that they deserve to know because it's a part of her life that if they're going to be such a constant part of, they deserve it. But she just needs time. So the two make up, everything kind of levels out, and they end up, watching a movie together to have things cool down and blow over. But we will be hearing about what happened to the pack eventually. It is also during this audio that we realize that the seer is not just a seer who can see visions into the future. They are also what's known as an oracle, a kind of a subgroup of seers who can not only see into the future, but also can look into the past. Now, while this does make them a much more powerful seer, it does have its drawbacks, whereas visions of the future are kind of sporadic and at random and are more triggered by certain words or actions, or when a decision is made that will affect the future timeline, that kind of triggers an involuntary vision. Visions of the past have to be brought upon by the oracle. So they have to actually try to dig into the past of people who they have interacted with. So people who you spend a lot of time with as an oracle, it gives you more of an access into their past. Whereas if it's just a random person on the street, it would be much more difficult to look into any of their history, if that makes sense. As stated previously, the seer was looking into Beth's past to kind of understand her better and happened to come upon Alexander obviously did not mean to have that slip during conversation, but there we are. It is also during this audio where the seer reveals to Beth that they have kind of appointed her as a confidant to know that they are an oracle. Being an oracle is obviously a very coveted position and a very special ability. So the people who can know about it are a very small number within one circle. And now that Beth is part of this circle, she receives a letter from Sight. Now, Sight is the Specialized Investigative Guild for Honoring Truth, which is a mouthful. It is essentially a branch of the Bureau of Magic, which is the overall governing magical system. I probably should have mentioned that a little beforehand. But yeah, the Bureau is kind of like the magical government. They handle all the stuff that is magic. But Sight is a subsect of the Bureau that deals with seers and oracles. Essentially, it is just kind of a collection system of if seers have visions of natural disasters, of attacks on government officials, like anything, they report it to Sight, and Sight kind of collects various claims from different seers, and if enough seers all had a vision of the same event, they will do what is in their power to kind of warn non-magical society to the best of their ability, and to try to either prepare, prevent, or start getting ready for the recovery of any of these events. So now Beth is officially a confidant, recognized, and in the Sight system. And that's a lot of bureaucracy that I put on myself to create. Now that we've had a very angst-ridden audio, it is time for what I have heard people call the palate cleanser couple. We are introduced to a very new set of characters. The listener walks in to the Aquatica salon and spa, and we meet Chloe. Chloe is a bubbly, friendly, touchy-feely, very affectionate water elemental who works as a physical therapist and a masseuse at Aquatica. And she is just very, you say 5 words to her and suddenly you're friends. She wants to know all about you. She loves people. And the listener walks in, who we very quickly realize is Dewdrop, who is her partner. Dewdrop is also a water elemental. They work as a botanist and a field worker at the ranger station. So while they don't work directly with our normal park ranger, the two do cross paths quite frequently. So Dewdrop walks in, Chloe welcomes them with open arms and Flirting teases, but says that they have one more client and then she can go home with them. Turns out they're the client, they're an absolute dork, she is otherworldly levels of smitten. So the two of them have a little bit of flirty banter, and they have a little hand massage moment, and they go into the back for a proper massage because Dewdrop did actually pay for this service, and Chloe is nothing if not professional. So they are just flirty and fun, and they really have no plot in terms of the grand scheme of Glenwood. They are just a very fun, lighthearted couple who, like I said, are palate cleansers for the heavy stuff. Speaking of heavy stuff, we're going back to Genevieve and Knight. Genevieve has been, she's settled at the estate. Her and Knight have gotten very comfortable there. And now, the woman of the house, Lady Celine, has returned back to the estate after being away for a few weeks because she was out in Serbia. So Knight brings Genevieve to the estate, they walk in, and they meet Celine. Now, Celine is a regal vampire prime, a very Lady Dimitresque if she wasn't terrifying. And Selene welcomes them in, sits them down, offers them support, resources, whatever both of them might need. Genevieve is starstruck. She's very nervous to meet Selene, but the queen immediately calms her down and reassures her that Selene is not as intimidating as she might seem. They talk for a while, and eventually they get around to the topic of Genevieve's turning. So Genevieve does not remember her turning. She does not have any recollection of who it might have been or what might have happened during or afterwards. All she remembers is walking to her car one night after work, everything going dark, and then waking up near her apartment. So Selene is a little confused, because whenever a vampire is turned, especially if they're separated from their maker, there's something called separation pains. So when a vampire creates their progeny, sires another vampire, there is a bond between maker and progeny. It is an incredibly strong bond that links the two together almost physically. Or not actually physically, that was the wrong word. Metaphysically, I don't know. But their magic is essentially linked, because in order for the turning process to occur, the vampire needs to completely drain the human of their blood and then replace it with their own, essentially infusing their magical blood into the person to revive them and to instill the magical, like the vampiric magic into them and to bring them back from the dead and to make them into a vampire. So turnings are not accidental. It's not, oh, I bit you, you're a vamp now. It is a process. There is intention behind it. And there is a very strict law amongst vampires that if you create a vampire, they're your responsibility. So you must be there for them. Because if you're not, as I said before, there's something called separation pains. It is physically painful to be away from your maker or from your progeny. Both parties would feel the effects of it. Genevieve has not felt any of this. She hasn't felt any pull towards her maker. She hasn't felt any separation pains. It's like she doesn't have one at all. So Selene comes to the conclusion that potentially during the turning process, it was too much for the vampire and it killed them to turn her. That's the most logical assumption that she can make with the information that they have given. If the vampire did happen to survive, there's a good chance they could come back. Genevieve gets very nervous at this prospect of having to face her maker, but Selene assures her that she is safe and that as long as she is in Glenwood, she could not be more protected. I mean, if anything, Night is the most protective one in the entire series, so no one is getting past them. So Selene offers Genevieve a tour of the estate from her second-in-command or her right-hand man, Silas. Silas is another vampire who lives at the estate, and eventually he knocks at the door, takes Genevieve out, and the two of them, they chat for a little bit, and as Night goes to join them, Selene calls them back, and she can tell that they are still feeling the effects of the guilt after Genevieve's turning. They put a lot of that weight on their own shoulders when it doesn't deserve to be there. So she tries to quell that anxiety and that guilt as best as she can and reassures them that they are still a good person. And while the desire to go hunt down whoever turned their girlfriend might be incredibly strong, the best place that they can be is by Genevieve's side, supporting her and helping her through everything and being there. So we get kind of that mother-child dynamic between Celine and Knight, because she really does take them all under her wing, and she sees them as very close. She holds them all very close to her heart. After Knight leaves, Celine goes to the phone and makes a call to an unknown character. We don't know who she's calling, but she starts speaking to them about something called a codex, and finding that the reason she was in Serbia was because an old friend of hers was dead, and that whatever had killed them, they were looking for pages of something. So we learn a little bit that there's something more to Glenwood going on than we originally assume. We don't really learn much about that, except that these pages are being tracked down and being hidden, and that something about the magic is shifting in this town. And that is where the audio ends, on a bit of a cliffhanger. And while Genevieve might have a support system, the same cannot be said for Doll. The next episode, audio episode, either one, give or take. At this point, this is season 1, so I guess episode still works. At this episode, Rochelle comes to meet Doll because Doll has sent her a text that something happened. Rochelle rushes in, is worried, is very concerned, and we realize that Doll was practicing their magic unsupervised in their apartment and ended up hurting their roommate. Now, the roommate was sent to the hospital, is set to make a recovery, but it's because of Doll's magic that she was injured. So they're panicked, they're stressed out, they don't know what to do. Rochelle calms them down, and at some point, Doll asks Rochelle if they could stay with her and Rochelle's group. Now, Rochelle has vaguely, sometimes not really all that well, mentioned that she has her own clan, which she calls a clan, or her court, that don't really live in the city. They have their own kind of apartment complex where they have their base of operations. That is where her group lives. And Doll asks if the offer still stands if Rochelle would let them live with her while they learn their magic, because right now their magic feels too unstable to be left alone. And Rochelle at first protests, saying maybe it's not the right time, doesn't know if Doll's sure, but eventually agrees, sends Doll off to collect their belongings from their apartment and meet up with her. Like I said, this is going to be all over the place. And then the two will go to Rochelle's apartment in their town, and they will kind of settle in there. It's all very well and good. Rochelle thanks Doll for trusting her and believing in her that she will take care of things, and as soon as Doll is out of earshot, the dramatic irony of hearing Rochelle say, "Thank you for making this so easy." And while we don't know what exactly is being made easy, we're gonna find out very soon. Now, of course, time has passed. We're getting closer to the fall, and therefore the fall festival that the pack is hosting. So the ranger is once again on the pack's property with Claire. They're doing a perimeter check around the pack's, entire territory, which means going up into the mountains and consequentially going on a hike up these hills and the ravines, just to make sure that everything is kind of settled and safe and good to go. Claire doesn't appreciate having to waste her entire day doing safety checks that she's already completed, but she's the alpha, this is her job. So the two of them are walking around, and they end up going up onto this hill. It is like the northernmost point of their territory before it gets into like like I said, a ravine. Like, it gets, like, dangerous territory. So no one during the festival is going to be coming out all this way without the risk of being injured. So they start to go down this hill. And while Claire begins to go down first, Ranger insists on going ahead because they are the park ranger. This is their domain. But unfortunately, the ground slips out from under them and they wind up tumbling down the hill with Claire running after them. And they end up severely hurting their ankle. So Claire has to pick them up and carry them back to the den. Miraculously, their hat stays on their head their entire time, and this will become a running joke throughout the entire series that I refuse to let go. So Claire brings them back to the den, sits them down in the living room. What the hell is that? It's a goddamn truck. Okay. So Ranger is on the couch as Claire begins tending to them, and we discovered that Claire used to be an EMT, or used to be studying medicine, and used to have aspirations of being an EMT. That's what she wanted to do before she became the Alpha. She uses kind of her pre-med knowledge. She wraps up Ranger's foot. Unfortunately, Ranger cannot drive. It's just not an option. Claire will not allow them to leave, so it's decided that they're going to sleep over at the den for the evening. Whether Ranger wants it or not. So the audio ends with Ranger kind of just muttering under their breath like a petulant child, and Claire walking over to make them dinner. And don't worry, they still don't like each other, so it's fine. That being said, Beth did come to the den the next morning and found Ranger in one of the pack's spare shirts, limping around the den, which didn't bode well for Claire. Now, speaking of Beth, some time has passed since the revelation that was Seer's abilities and the kind of teasing on who Alexander was to the pack. So now we're finally here at the big confession. Beth comes over in the middle of the night, sits down with Seer, and basically dumps all of her family's trauma. Before the pack moved to Glenwood, their pack was much larger, like 40 plus people. And Claire was not the alpha. Their previous alpha was Alexander Green. Now, Alexander had been the alpha for several decades. He'd kind of been in charge of everything while being as hands-off as possible. He made all the decisions. He was incredibly iron-fisted when it came to running his pack, but when it came to actually interacting with them, he was all but non-existent. Rarely came to pack meetings, rarely talked to anybody, very much stayed to himself unless it was to give orders or to reinforce the rules of their pack, which was no shifting unless it's for a pack hunt or when we're, all together on vacation. No going off to any of these magical institutions and learning magic. Your shifting is all that you need, so there's no point in learning anything more. And so on and so forth. Keeping the pack as tied down as they possibly could be. Now, while the pack was very big, it was often very spread out. There wasn't a lot of community, you could say. That is, except every summer, when Alexander would rent out these cabins by a lake upstate, and the entire pack would get together for these 2 weeks, and they would just be a pack for once. They would spend time together, they would go into the local town and go bar hopping, go get dinner. The kids would be able to run around in the forest and be able to shift freely. It was the only time that the pack ever felt like a pack, as far as Beth could remember. Unfortunately, one night, while most of the adults were downtown, bar hopping, enjoying life as, adults. Claire, Beth, and some of the teenagers were staying at the cabins with the kids, to keep an eye on them. Some of the adults had stayed behind to talk to Alexander inside one of the cabins because they did not appreciate the way that Alexander was running things. They didn't feel that he was an effective leader. They didn't want to stay as part of the pack. So nearly half of them had all agreed that after this summer, many of them were going to separate from the pack and either go off on their own or join other packs. But the decision had been made. And the decision was reinforced by Alexander's beta, Macy. Now, Macy had kind of been the one who was really running things. She was the one that everyone went to. So it was her brother, and several of the other adults who kind of went to Alexander and just let him know what was happening. Unfortunately, Alexander being faced with suddenly not only losing control of his pack, but having his pack essentially, quote-unquote, betray him, it sent him into a frenzy. He lost control, he lost his temper, and that's an understatement. But he completely went off the rails. He wound up killing the 6 adults that had gone to talk to him. And when Claire and Beth kind of snuck away from the teenagers, Claire went into the cabin to kind of rifle through the liquor cabinet, and Claire found the bodies of her pack members. Alexander caught her off guard and wound up scratching her on her arm. And Claire was able to get out of the cabin and kind of deadbolt the door behind her before she ran to get Beth and the kids and scrambled to get them out of there. Now, they got to the car fine until they realized that Knight was nowhere to be seen. And because the kids were being so loud and they wanted to talk to Genevieve, they had wandered off somewhere to call Genevieve and have kind of some, privacy, which would have been fine in any other case. So Claire gave Beth the keys and told her to go, to get the kids out of there, to meet with Simon, to call the bureau, just to get them out. And at this point, Beth has no idea what's happening. The kids don't know what's happening. All they know is that Claire is screaming at them with blood pouring down her arm, yelling at them to run. So Beth does what she's told. She gets the kids out of there. She drives about halfway towards the town after calling Simon and calling the bureau. Tristan and Ro are in the back seat, and while they're still teenagers, they're still kids, they're still old enough to understand that something is incredibly wrong. And so they're screaming at Beth to turn around and to get Claire and to get Knight. Beth doesn't listen to them and just meets with Simon, and as soon as the group meets up about halfway, Beth doesn't even turn off the car before she shifts and runs back to the cabins. On the way back to the cabins, she finds Knight. Now, Knight is still in their human form. Their leg is mangled but healed just enough that they can walk on it. They can't shift, but they can walk. So Beth catches up to them, and they both realize that while Claire might have started running with Knight out of the cabins, she is no longer with them. Beth is obviously panicked. Knight doesn't know what's happening. They thought Claire was behind them. She wasn't. So she's still at the cabins with Alexander. By the time that Beth and Knight and the rest of the pack finally get back to the cabins, Claire has been gravely injured. To the point where if healers were to be called and if they were on their way, she would not make it. And Beth tells the seer about how a healer was able to get there in time and keep Claire alive. But the 6 members of the pack who Alexander attacked did not make it that night. And though Beth didn't see anything herself, Simon assured her that Alexander would no longer be a problem. What followed after that night was a year-long process of going to trial, of getting witness statements and trying to figure out what exactly happened. And that's where the entire pack found out about half the pack wanting to leave, about Alexander trying to hoard the power, about Claire's testimony and what happened to her. Eventually it all culminates to Alexander being convicted posthumously, because he's gone. And Claire is appointed to the position of Alpha. Now, whether she wanted it or not, it is now her position, and she is charged with putting the pack together after this devastating event. Unfortunately, the half of the pack that had planned to leave, they still go. It doesn't matter if Alexander is no longer the Alpha anymore. Many of them leave regardless. And the pack is kind of left to pick up the pieces of whatever they possibly can, which eventually leads to them all packing up their stuff, moving to Glenwood, and restarting their lives. Now, clearly, on so many levels, this was an incredibly traumatizing event for Beth and Knight and Claire especially. And it's gone to the point where a lot of them don't talk about it anymore. Claire especially, Beth mentions, does not speak of it. No one wants to mention it to her, and she feels that she does not deserve to talk to Knight about it because of the way that she handled finding Knight in the woods without Claire. And it's revealed that at some point before the move and after Claire was appointed as the Alpha, Beth did not handle this time period very well. She was incredibly angry and confused and overwhelmed and had no healthy outlet at this time, and so took a lot of her aggression and frustration out on Claire and said some things that, in her words, she will never forgive herself for. Now, we don't know what exactly she said, but inferences can be made to what she possibly could have said to her best friend, who was nearly killed and now was put in charge of her entire family, who are all dealing with the ramifications of this. It's now been a few years since that happened. At this point, it's been about 3 or 4 years since that whole event occurred. A lot of them are better. A lot of them could be better. But Beth felt comfortable enough to actually tell the seer about what happened and about her experiences, and feel safe enough to do so, which is something that she didn't think she would ever have. So the two finally have that moment of comfort at the very end, and Beth gets a very much deserved hug. Now that the angst is out of the way, it is time for the Glenwood Fall Festival, the very first kind of mega collab on the channel. This has a bunch of characters, and this is where a lot of people kind of realize that, oh, this is a big thing. So the Fall Festival begins with Knight and Evie. They are dressed up as Granny and the Huntsman because, of course, they are. Somehow the court has convinced Miss Celine to dress up as Lady Dimitrescu from... Oh god, I'm not going to say the wrong game. I'm not going to say the wrong game, so I'm not going to say the game at all because I can't remember what it is right now. And I would be crucified if I said the wrong one. But everyone knows Lady D. We all love her. The giant vampire. Yes. So the three of them are all decked out. Knight and Evie go to the den where the fall festival is in full swing. Everything is decorated. There's vendors, there's food trucks, there is a corn maze. So much stuff is going on. Everyone's having a good time. Beth shows up. She is dressed as a regular old classic slasher villain. So she has like the hockey mask, the big old knife. She's having a great time. Claire is dressed up as Van Helsing because that was her favorite movie growing up, which says a lot, I think. So the four of them are chatting, they're hanging out, having a good time. Meanwhile, at the library, they were having arts and craft events for the kids and families. That is now over, so the kids can go get dressed up and go out for trick-or-treating. Abby and Deer, our open wielder, are planning on, going to the fall festival, hanging out, going to see all the decorations. They've already had that planned, but because Rose is also leaving for the night, they offer to have her come along as well, and the three of them are gonna chill out. So they're having a good time together, although Rose is constantly making comments about being exasperated by Abigail. Again, she likes it. Knight and Evie go off to do whatever they like to do. They are going to the hay rides. Unfortunately, they get sidetracked in a bush and do very wholesome things together before Evie gets distracted by candy apples. I'm trying to look who else is in this. Oh, yes. Beth and Claire are chatting together. Eventually, Beth goes off to pick up the seer, who is getting into their costume because they had to work late that night. So Claire's on her own, and all of a sudden they spot the ranger. The ranger has arrived in none other than Oh my god. Oh god. We're already at an hour and 17 minutes. I'm very tired. So Ranger has come in dressed as a werewolf with the wolf ears, a tail, a torn up t-shirt. They're looking absolutely spectacular. Claire goes over to them. They're chatting, actually being civil, and they agree on a 48-hour truce. So they're not going to get on each other's nerves for 2 days, and then they can go back to going at each other's throats. But they have their little moment together. Beth comes back, and the seer is trying to get into their costume, but can't really fit into it, or something's going on. They're trying to put it together. So Beth opens the door to find that Seer is dressed in a giant cardboard box built up of various cereal boxes, because they are a serial killer. Absolute fucking idiot, and I love them to death. So Beth loses her shit, makes a little comment about how, they're kind of matching, slasher and serial killer. It's very cute. While all of this is going on, Celine is back at the estate. She's gotten out of costume, and she's just sitting in her study. She has a small fire going in the fireplace, and she is just sitting back, humming to herself as she enjoys the very peaceful Halloween night. And that is how that audio ends, with everyone just being together and having fun and enjoying the festivities. Immediately after the fall festival, however, we're getting right back into the feelings. Not bad feelings, though, because this is confession from a Tsundere werewolf. So this is finally Beth cannot hold it in anymore. She has been trying to figure out the best way to do this without Seer having visions of it and then ruining the whole thing. So Beth, again, in the middle of the night, comes to Seer's house and is like, hey, we gotta talk. Even though they both have been dancing around each other, they both know what she's gonna say without having to actually say it, but Beth has her big emotional speech and confesses her feelings, and the two of them are just absolute saps for one another. I genuinely teared up while recording this one. But yes, this is Beth getting in touch with her feelings and confessing to the seer, and the two of them are now officially a couple. And the entire pack is going to give them shit for it because they have been begging Beth to finally, just come out and say it. So they will all be very happy now with this revelation. And once again, because we love consistency on this channel, Chloe, once again, follows up for an emotional Beth audio. Again, a very low-key, easy-peasy audio. Dewdrop comes home from work. Evie is sitting on the couch reading a little spicy book. And Dewdrop wants attention. Evie wants to finish her chapter, so Dewdrop attempts to distract her for the last couple pages, which is, of course, completely innocent and just, it tickles. Yeah, that's what it is. So they're having a good old time on their end in domestic bliss. And now we go from domestic bliss to domestic antagonization with Claire and Ranger. After the fall festival, Ranger left some of their costume pieces at the den, so Claire has come by to drop them off again. But Ranger is not in the best of moods, and that just bleeds into their conversation, and suddenly, forget the 48-hour truce, they are back at each other's throats all over again. And I keep saying that phrase, I realize. I'm sorry about that. I'll think of something more creative. So they're going at it, and Ranger reveals that, well, originally the poachers were caught by the police. I think I might have mistaken this. They weren't let go initially. They have been let go now. So while their licenses may have been revoked initially when they were taken in, they have been released from jail, and their licenses, they're poachers. A lack of a license is not going to stop them from hunting big game, especially if they believe that there are giant wolves on the den territory. So now Claire is incredibly worried, and she is offering to help, to offer resources. She has not only an entire pack of werewolves on their side, but also Celine and her entire court who can offer aid and resources. But Ranger says no. This is their job, they will handle it, because they don't realize that Claire has all of these resources at her disposal. She is just a civilian in their eyes. So Claire gets pissed, Ranger gets pissed, and at some point, Claire just storms out. If Ranger is caught in the red tape and can't do any more than they already have, then she will have to go on her own and do things her way. She ends up calling Diane, and not so subtly asking for information on the poachers, which technically is confidential. However, Diane offers that she might have potentially left the entire file of all of that information on a table in the back room of the library that Claire just might be, able to pick up if she swings by the next morning at 11. So Claire ends the call with Diane, calls Beth, lets her know what's going on, and calls for a pack meeting to kind of get things going. And she is now going to hunt for information on these poachers herself. With that plot now kind of set into motion, we go back with Evie and Knight. Knight has been doing their absolute best to not only juggle going on pack hunts, but also being with Genevieve during the evening hours when she's actually awake. Unfortunately, this has led to them having a very, very poor sleep schedule. Evie recognizes this, and it's just a very sweet comfort audio of making sure that Knight gets some rest, she can read her book, she can do whatever she's got to do, as long as they get some sleep. So, resting with your sweet vampire girlfriend is just a lovely sleep aid audio. And then we get our other vampire character. We're back with Rochelle. Doll has officially moved in with Rochelle and her court. They have their own apartment. just got all of their furniture moved in, they're settled down, and Rochelle is very happy to now have Doll so close to home. They're chatting, Doll asks more questions about vampires and blood mages, and we get a little more lore about the history of blood mages and why they are such a rare breed. So according to Rochelle, blood mages and vampires used to kind of be interlocked. They had a symbiotic relationship. Blood mages don't bleed out as easily. They almost have an overproduction of blood, so vampires can feed from blood mages without worrying about them, dying or passing out after a few gulps. I really don't like how I use the word gulp. I hated that. Not gonna take it out, though. So we learn more about vampires and blood mages, how they used to be interlinked in their history until suddenly vampires did not appreciate the fact that blood mages were essentially immune to their abilities. A conflict broke out into all-out war between vampires and blood mages until finally there was a last stance. And we're talking centuries worth of conflict, but unfortunately that led to generations of blood mages being wiped out by, one generation of vampires, because while the vampires could live for hundreds of years during this battle, the blood mages still aged like regular humans. So they didn't stand a chance in terms of the longevity of the battles. However, in this last stance, there was the final battle called the Last Breath of Endax, Endax being the very last and strongest of the blood mage covens. The Endax coven really held the line for this last stance, but unfortunately the war ended with blood mages being almost entirely wiped out. And it took a few generations for the magic to even come back into existence, because so many blood mages who were left just stopped practicing their magic for fear of being hunted down. This is obviously a very broad history from Rochelle. She wasn't actually there during the final stance of Endax. However, she does feel very strongly about this belief and still holds quite a bit of resentment for vampires and what they did to her people. She still considers herself a blood mage more than a vampire, even though she is no longer technically one. But she still has this opportunity to pass down the history of the blood mages to Doll so that they can carry on the legacy. Back in Glenwood, we are once again with the Ranger, who, after realizing that they may have been kind of a jerk to Claire, they actually go out to the den to kind of apologize, but Claire is not present. Instead, they are met with Beth, who is definitely not as diplomatic as Claire is. Beth has no problem calling Ranger out on their shit and letting it be very well known that they are a nuisance to the pack. But she also makes sure that Ranger knows that Claire isn't actually upset with them. They would know if Claire was upset with them, because you're not worried when Claire's yelling. You gotta get worried when Claire gets quiet, according to Beth. But it ends with Beth giving Ranger Claire's number and sending them on their merry way. Now, meanwhile, Claire is at the Glenwood Library, and she is doing research on the poachers. She has their names, their history, she has files and paperwork, and about 50 million tabs open on her laptop. She's doing some hard research, but the library is about to close, and Rose walks over to offer any assistance. Now, magic users can kind of sense each other's aura. It's how Beth knew that Beautiful was a seer when they first met. So Claire immediately recognizes that Rose is a telepath, just like Rose recognizes that Claire is a shifter. So the two of them have a discussion about what's going on. Claire kind of clues Rose in on the poacher situation, and Ro just immediately suggests that the pack should, to the poachers. Which, as she should. But Claire, kind of like Ranger, is also caught in the red tape because since they are magic wielders and they are shifters, they're at an automatic disadvantage to these human poachers, and so unless the poachers strike at them first, they can't really retaliate or go after them without getting into some serious trouble with the Bureau. So Claire is trying to find out as much information on them as she possibly can. Unfortunately, she has to kind of wrap things up for the evening and continue with her research later. However, as she leaves the library, she makes one last call to the Bureau Department of Records. She had looked into one of the poachers who kind of caught her eye. Nothing came back, except that part of her paperwork was misfiled. And Claire discovers that Ranger is what's known as a non-wielder liaison, someone who does not have magic or possess any magical abilities, but has been registered with the Bureau and who knows about the magical world. Claire did not write them down as an NWL, but their file is clear as day in the records that they have known about magic for about 8 years. Obviously, this is not great. Claire is incredibly pissed by this, because now she thinks that Ranger has just been dodging her for no reason and lying to her about everything, which, granted, they can't tell that Claire has magic, but still, the fact that Claire even went as so far as to joke about being a shifter who works with vampires during the fall festival, and Ranger said nothing, she's not too happy about it. But she kind of tucks that away for now, since she has much bigger priorities to handle. Okay, we have officially hit the 1 hour 30-minute mark. Good God, we are barely halfway through. I'm so sorry. I genuinely didn't think I made this much content. Anywho, this is a good water break. This is a good time. Get water, get a snack, get more water than you think you need. I am dying. Whew. Okay. How you doing? Did you make it this far? Have you actually listened to all of this? How are you okay? Are you okay? I don't believe you if you say yes. Hopefully you're using this to be productive, like to sleep. I really hope you're getting some sleep and you're getting some good rest. Yeah, okay. Good, little minute break after all this nonsense. Okay, where are we next? I can't tell. Okay, we're back with Abigail. So we're back in the library with Abby. Deer and Abby are talking, they're hashing things out, and then Abby starts talking about when she moved here, and how it was a little strange, how Glenwood just kind of appeared one day, how she's looked at the maps over and over and over again during all of her research, and Glenwood's never popped up on her radar, and suddenly it's just there. Deer also kind of admits that they had a similar situation whenever they saw Glenwood. And the two start talking about the, oddities in the town. Of course, Abigail believed that there has to be a conspiracy. There is a hidden secret in the town that nobody knows about. Granted, while Deer understands that magic exists, Abigail doesn't. So Deer doesn't really know if we're talking about magic or an actual conspiracy or what's going on. They're just along for the ride that Abby is dragging them on by the back of the neck. But there is something quite strange about Glenwood that isn't typical. Magic wielders residing there aside. So the two of them begin their research into the Glenwood conspiracy. They decide not to let Rose in on this little plan of theirs because there's a good chance Rose might be in on it. Who knows? And now we have finally made it to the 2023 content with the New Year's Eve spectacular. This is another kind of mega collab with a bunch of characters all overlapping with each other. There is a party at the den where most of the characters are currently. Celine stops by. A bunch of the vampires from her court come to the den. Everyone's having fun, having a good time. At some point, Claire brings Ro outside. Now, Ro is non-binary. They go by they, them pronouns. And they have for quite a while, but Claire takes them into the back porch and gives them an envelope that has a bunch of paperwork to have their name legally changed. Along with fees and all that, the entire pack has come together to make sure that Ro can get all their documentation changed so that they are officially Ro. It was a very sweet moment that I really enjoyed including into the series, and I am very much looking forward to bringing Ro back in the future. They're a fan favorite, and I adore them so much. So the pack has their time together. Rose and Deer are now going to visit Abby. Now, Abby lives above the Glenwood Diner. Now, the Glenwood Diner is a 24/7 diner run by a lovely southern lady named Liza. Now, Liza, she works as a waitress. She also owns the place. She's the renter that is allowing Abby to live above the diner at all. So Abby is her tenant. So Rose and Deer go to the diner to meet up with Abby to enjoy the festivities of the New Year's together. And we get to meet Liza and kind of chat with her for a minute. It's all going very well. At the very end, there is a countdown, which took me so long to figure out how to do. But eventually, the clock strikes 0, and, some characters get a good little New Year's kiss. It's all very, very fun. Eventually, Evie kind of gets Claire and Beth's attention and brings them outside because in the sky over the den is an aurora borealis. Now, none of them really know how that's happening. It definitely shouldn't be, given where they are. There's kind of this ripple of panic as people think that there's something wrong. But eventually, Celine just looks up in the sky and says it's a gift. We don't necessarily know who the gift is from specifically. Could be several different people, but Celine seems pleasantly surprised by it. So everyone kind of calms down, and, Claire and Celine have their own private moment together. We realize that Claire and Celine actually have a much closer relationship than we might have previously thought. It's more than just business partners. Celine does care very deeply for Claire and the rest of the pack, and Claire looks up to Celine and values her very much as a peer, especially being two matriarchs of their group, you could say. So Celine kind of gives Claire the okay to relax and to let go and to enjoy herself at the party because Claire has been incredibly on edge the whole night because parties have not gone very well for her family in the past. But for this one night, to enjoy the holidays and the festivities with her family, Claire tells everyone to shift, and they're going to have a good time. They're going to have fun, and they're just going to enjoy each other's company. So once again, Celine watches over the pack as they play together, they wrestle, they have fun, and she just stares up into the night sky and enjoys the light show. And now we are finally into the content that has come from this past year. After an hour and almost 40 minutes, we're finally in this current year. Good Lord. Once again, we are back with Rose and the Open Wielder. The two of them are studying together, kind of learning about magic and the different hierarchies of magic and what the Bureau is. Once again, the Bureau is the Department of Magical Justice, or it's magical government. It's the ministry. It's the department. It is the all-encompassing bullshit. But Rose is incredibly proud of the Open Wielders' progress and how much they've learned and how much they've grown. And, you know, the Wielder starts mentioning about potentially, potential, potentially, oh my god. The Wielder starts talking about potentially telling Abby about magic, and Rose says that's not a good idea. And they talk about it, and they say, let's wait. Yeah, it's a very low-key audio, just kind of establishing that Rose cares very deeply for the Wielder and for Abby, but is still very cautious about letting her know about the world of magic in its entirety because, you know, Abby's whole job is talking about magic and unveiling the secrets of the world, so maybe letting her in on a secret magical community wouldn't be for the best. But who knows? Now that Genevieve has kind of settled as a vampire, there are certain realities to vampirism that she and Knight both have to face. Namely, that Genevieve now solely survives off of the consumption of blood. Now, for the most part, she has been getting what is called enchanted blood or supplemental blood. There is a whole business transaction between the pack and the court that the wolves will hunt down, you know, local game, they'll hunt deer, things like that. They will take the meat, but the blood is drained, and through a magical process that Claire is able to perform, the blood is transformed. The proteins, the amino proteins, are altered. So the deer blood is more closely related to human blood and therefore more fulfilling and, you know, satiating for vampires. This is something just so the vampires have kind of a storage system of spare blood, so if anything like Evie's situation were to happen, they don't have to worry about, you know, going to a blood bank and waiting for that process or finding some poor soul to almost drain, but not quite. Instead, they have these jars of supplemental blood that are able to sate a vampire's hunger very quickly, very easily, and this has been an established system that they have built. Claire not only works with Celine's court, but also several others, including a vampire named Clayton and a vampire named Valera. So she works with several courts at once, and that is kind of their pack's business. Now, obviously, Evie can't live forever on this supplemental blood. Eventually, she's going to need to feed from a living source. And Knight is a little nervous about that, so this audio is them going to Celine and just asking for advice on exactly what to do, if it's okay that they're not ready for this, and when they are ready, how the hell to approach it. Celine is very gentle in her explanations on how it would be best to bite from the arm or something, you know, a little more stable than the neck. Celine really steps into her mom role with these two because she's just so excited that they're, you know, considering taking this next step in their relationship. She's just so excited and over the moon for them and just wants what's best. But as they're talking, suddenly Celine gets a little more worried. They begin talking about Genevieve's maker and how, despite the fact that Celine sent out someone of her court to, you know, where Genevieve was supposedly turned, there is no evidence that it ever happened. When a vampire dies, they are immediately turned into ash. You know, that is whether they are burned in sunlight or if they are, you know, decapitated. However they die, they immediately turn to ash. there was no ashes anywhere where Genevieve was attacked. Despite the fact that the vampires found evidence that there was an attack, they found Genevieve's blood on the concrete, there was no ashes. So Celine starts to get worried and starts asking questions and believes that Genevieve may have been the victim of what's called bond burying, a practice where a maker can sire a new vampire, but while that magic is still, untethered to the new vampire, it's not exactly settled, it's still swirling around in them. The maker, if they know how to do it, is able to quite literally bury the bond between maker and progeny beneath all of that untethered magic. So when it finally settles, the maker is completely off the hook. They have no responsibility to their sire, and the progeny has no idea. There is no pain, there is no pull to be with the maker, there is no connection. It's so buried beneath their magic that unless the maker kind of reinstates it, it's like it never existed. It is an incredibly frowned upon practice amongst the vampire community and something that Celine loathes. She absolutely despises this practice and anyone who chooses to perform it. So automatically we get to see Celine go from, very loving and happy to very grave in a matter of minutes. But she needs to confirm this, so she sends Knight out to get Genevieve, so they can have confirmation that this is what's happening, and once they figure out if the bond is actually buried, they can work on finding Genevieve's maker. Knight is obviously stressed out, but Celine reaffirms that while Genevieve is in Glenwood, she is safe, and that is not going to change no matter what happens. So Knight runs off, and Celine is left to deliberate on what to do. In another part of Glenwood, Claire has been called by Diane in quite a fit of nerves because the ranger has gotten themselves into a bar fight. Now, Claire is asked to go down to the bar and pick them up and take them home because Diane doesn't see very well at night and can't really drive at this time. So Claire agrees, she goes down to the bar, and she is pissed. She is furious. But the anger kind of subsides whenever Ranger explains to her that the people they got into the bar fight with were the poachers. They were at the bar, drinking, making some incredibly unsavory threats about Claire and her family because, to them, not only was it the Ranger, but it was Claire and the pack who got their licenses revoked and got them in trouble. So now they've got a score to settle, and Ranger did not appreciate hearing all of those threats, so they decided to throw hands. Quite well, might I add. They took several teeth with them. So Claire gets them in the car, they're driving back home, and Claire is still pretty bitter about the whole NWL situation. So she begins to talk to the Ranger about it, admits that she refused to answer their texts or their calls because she was mad and couldn't decide whether she wanted to punch them in the face or give them a round of applause for their stunning performance. Now, the two of them are talking, and Claire is explaining how she knows about their secret. There's no sense in hiding it anymore. She understands why they might have kept it to themselves, but at this point, there's no need to. And while Claire is talking about magic, Ranger is thinking about something else. And so it is just a comedy of errors with nothing but miscommunication after miscommunication, until finally Claire realizes that the Ranger doesn't know about magic. They don't register anything about being licensed, about the Bureau, about shifters, none of it. which leaves Claire even more confused than before, and Ranger is just totally lost and now incredibly embarrassed. So the two of them are driving, they're trying to figure things out, and suddenly they pull over on the side of the road and see the Glenwood reservation sign. There's a bullet hole in it that was definitely not there before. So clearly, now the poachers are getting much more bold with their threats. Claire ends up taking Ranger back home, and they agree that whatever they spoke of tonight does not need to be acknowledged further. And I remember all of the comments I got about that. People were not happy with me. I was delighted. So now that Claire and Ranger are properly spiraled, we are back with Doll and Rochelle. Now, Rochelle really isn't in this one very much, because Doll is now at the apartment. They're not really doing much. They're kind of just there with free food, free rent, and nothing but time. They're practicing their magic, but there's really no one to talk to until Rochelle teaches them how to, use blood to make physical objects. Like, tweezers, keys, toothpicks. I don't know why I included that in the script, but that's what we went with. And at some point, the other vampires in Rochelle's court come back from a hunt, and Rochelle leaves Doll alone in their apartment, but not before locking the door behind her from the outside. But Doll, being a little more innovative and just a little more willing to push the boundaries, they craft a key out of blood using their magic, and they use it to unlock the door. So they go walking up and down the hallways, trying to look for anybody, and they wind up meeting Isaiah. Isaiah is Rochelle's second in command. He is the Silas of this court of vampires. And he meets Doll and is immediately nothing but friendly. Welcomes them in, gives them a big old hug, wants to know all about them, just wants to chat. He is incredibly sweet and kind. Eventually, Rochelle catches the two of them, and while she doesn't mention that Doll definitely shouldn't be out of their room, she does wonder what Doll's doing wandering up and down the hallways. But Isaiah kind of takes it on the chin and says that he was the one that ran into them and got them distracted. So Rochelle sends Doll further down the hallway to her apartment, where many of the vampires are gathering for kind of a movie night, hangout, just, build kind of a community, get them integrated with the rest of the court. This leaves Rochelle and Isaiah alone together, and the two of them start talking about why Doll is there to begin with. And Isaiah starts questioning why they're hiding things from them, and why she can't just tell them the truth, that the reason Doll is here is because they need them and their blood magic to turn them human again. And that is the goal of this court, is to turn all of these vampires who have been collected from all different corners of the country, who were left with no maker, with no knowledge of how they were turned, no resources for how to navigate this new life. They want to become human. And Rochelle, having been a blood mage and kind of knowing that there is a possibility, has gathered all of these vampires under her wing to make that happen. But it's a lot of pressure to put on one person, and so Rochelle insists that Doll be left in the dark for now. And until then, they'll continue operating as normal. Moving along from the plot a little bit, we go for a comfort audio with Your Werewolf Girlfriend Helps You Sleep. Seer has had a bit of a nightmare. They can't really get back to sleep. They call Beth, and she comes running over, and by running over, I mean running directly into the back door head first. And as CW loves to talk about, I couldn't find a good enough sound effect for that moment, so I just ended up running into the door of my office, which it worked well. It worked really well for me. But yes, Beth comes over and the seer explains how they had a dream or a vision. They can't really tell which it was, but they remember hearing a radio broadcast that there was a huge fire at the den, a huge portion of the forest was destroyed, and there were 4 casualties to the fire. Now, they don't know if it's a vision or not, so Beth kind of runs through a pre-selected list of questions to help them determine whether it was just a dream to be brushed off or a vision that should be reported to sight. After kind of going through all that, Seer's a little less nervous, but Beth still pulls them into bed and has them lay on her chest and just does her best to help them clear their mind and sleep. And it is a well-deserved rest. So yes, another sleep aid. I really should do more of those. I do enjoy doing them a lot. The vision does end up being taken to heart and seen as a proper warning for the pack, because the next audio is Claire calling the ranger and warning them that something could potentially go wrong at the station. She informs them that while she can't tell them exactly how she knows, she has it on good authority that something is going to go wrong in the next few weeks, and to just make sure that no one stays over at the station longer than necessary, which means no overnights, no staying past dark. She just wants to make sure that everyone is safe, even if she can't specifically tell the ranger how she knows or why she's telling them. She still insists that they believe her, and they're just crazy enough to do it. So that is kind of one of the shortest audios, but still one that is very important for the future. Now, while the poacher arc is going on with our vampires and werewolves, our open wielder at the library is having their own crisis. They want to tell Abby about magic, but they understand that Rose has some valid concerns, but they don't know who else to talk to about it. So they go to the diner, where Abby isn't actually there. She is upstate visiting family, or out of state, I should say, visiting family. But Miss Liza is there, and she is able to kind of sit with them and hear out all their issues and give them a fresh perspective from someone who doesn't have stake in the game on either side. She concedes that Rose does have a point in being cautious and that they can't just go headfirst into it, but it's more dangerous to not tell Abby and have her figure out on her own than to have it come from the 2 people that she trusts most. So Open Wielder is kind of left with a big decision to make, but at least they have more of a grounded perspective in terms of how they want to handle this. We also discover at the end of this audio that Liza has a particular trouble patron who comes in quite regularly that she has history with. We don't really engage with them at all, but they're kind of now introduced to the universe, and they are a brand new listener character who will pop up a little bit later. If you are still with me at this point, then you get a fucking gold star. Good for you. Well done. I'm barely with me at this point. But moving right along, we are now at one of the very first character audios that I made on the channel. Most of these have included a listener, but this one is exclusively between Claire and Celine, so no listener characters around, but we just kind of get a glimpse into their relationship and how they're talking about their various issues in life. So Claire goes over to the estate to meet with Celine. They have very regular meetings like this where Claire will come over, they'll share a drink, they'll chat, they'll gossip, and Claire can kind of let go of the alpha ship for a while. She can just relax and breathe for once, which that is the goal and why Celine always invites her over. Also to tease her, but that's another thing. So the 2 of them are chatting. Claire lets Celine know that Beth and the seer are now an item. They tease about Genevieve and Knight, but eventually they get into more serious topics, namely Genevieve's maker, and how Celine has sent several of her court members out to find said maker now that they've gotten confirmation that it was bond burying that Genevieve was struck with. Struck with? We're gonna go with it. So yeah, Genevieve's maker is more than likely still alive, but buried the bond underneath Genevieve's magic when she was turned so that she wouldn't have any recollection of having a maker or any of the repercussions. While that might sound good at first, not having to worry about the separation pains or the pull, it also means that at any point Genevieve's maker could come back and reinstate the bond, and suddenly Genevieve is under their control, essentially. So they want to find her maker as quickly as possible and have the situation dealt with, because Celine is worried that if there are vampires out there who are creating progeny and burying the bonds and just creating one after the other after another, she is very worried that what they are building is a legion. So just a vampire who controls all of their progeny, who then goes out and creates more. Basically, vampiric MLM. That's the most terrifying description I can give it. It's a vampiric, multi-level marketing scheme. So they discuss Genevieve, and Claire goes on to discuss the poacher problem. Now, Claire has suspicions that one of the poachers is a magic wielder. She mentions how during her research she found information about a pack in Montana who had a very similar issue of poachers coming onto their property. Most of the poachers were non-wielders, had no idea what was going on, but one of the poachers was an open wielder who was actively looking for wolf packs in the area and using non-wielders as kind of a cover, like, oh, well, they didn't know there were magic wielders here. But specifically searching out shifters in order to get a big payout, because a large wolf pelt will get a pretty penny on the market. Unfortunately, one of the pack members was killed in Montana, and while the open wielder was found, he ended up disappearing. So no one knows if the pack got to him or if the Bureau just discreetly handled the case and didn't put out any records of it for the public. Either way, Claire doesn't have any confirmation on who this guy is or where he went, but it's very similar to the situation they're facing with now, with having poachers coming onto their property and increasingly getting more bold and more aggressive. And if they know that there are large wolves here, any open wielder or any wielder in general is going to know it's probably a shifter pack. And if they haven't backed off yet, they're not going to back off at all. So Claire is very worried that she is dealing with a magical combatant, I guess. But she thinks she might just be overly paranoid because of her past. Everything seems like a life or death situation. But Celine assures her that she's being responsible. It's better to be cautious than not. We get several confirmations in this audio about the characters in general. It is revealed that Claire is a blood mage. She has blood magic as well as being a shifter. So Celine has kind of been overseeing her progress for the last 3 years or so. Additionally, it is confirmed that the reason the ranger doesn't remember anything about magic or the magical world or being registered as an NWL is because at some point they had an encounter with a vampire who wiped their memory of magic entirely. And because it was never reported, they just remained as a licensed NWL without having any knowledge of it. But that is something that Claire can't exactly focus on right now when she has the threat of the poachers weighing on her and her pack's head. But the two chat, we hear a little bit more about their history together. Claire actually purchased the den from Celine. It was Claire's idea to start this business of converting blood into supplements that vampires can use. And we get a little more history on Celine in general, on how Celine is actually married. She has been married. She has a loving wife named Lydia, and the two of them have been together for quite a long time, so long that they've actually shared a 100-year anniversary and had a very fun time in Paris in 1736, which so many people went searching for, like, historical events. I just picked a random year. I'm so sorry. I'll pick a better year next time. But yes, Claire and Celine have their little bonding moment, and, they get to just relax with each other, which was very nice getting to make that audio between the two of them, because we get to see sides of Claire and Celine that we don't usually get to. Alright, we've got 20 more audios, and then we are all caught up for Season 2. So, now we are at Rose. So by this point, the open wielder has been working at the library for nearly a year, around there, maybe a little bit more. Time's been a little funky in terms of, like, the timeline. Things haven't been progressing exactly in time with the regular world, but, it's around there, around a year. So, at this point, Rose and Deer have gotten very close to each other. Open wielder cares very much for Rose, just as Rose cares very much for, her open wielder. She has a soft spot for them, and there's, a little bit of a crush, a bit, kind of, maybe, a little bit, a hint of it, a hint. But the open wielder has been invited to come over to Rose's home, where Rose is chilling out with, oh my god, I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention him. Rose has a pet bearded dragon named Excalibur. So Excalibur is her pride and joy, the prince of the library, an absolute delight. So Deer comes over to meet Excalibur, to chill with him. And they start talking, as one does. Rose and Deer, not Rose and Excalibur. Yeah, this is fine. That's fine. We'll leave that in. So Rose and Deer begin talking, and Rose reveals that she has the proper application paperwork for Abby to be registered as an NWL. And as we discuss why Rose was hesitant to tell Abby, we realize that Rose has a bit of a history with non-wielders taking advantage of the magical world. Whenever she presented as a telepath, neither of her parents were telepaths themselves. Her mother was an open wielder, and her father had no magic at all, but saw the potential in Rose's abilities. So instead of registering her with the Bureau, they instead got her private tutors, pulled her out of public school, and had her start working directly for her father in the quote-unquote business. Essentially going into meetings with her father with potential business partners, business rivals, smaller companies, and using Rose's telepathic abilities to gain information, to gain blackmail material, and an endless list of things. Endless list of things that a child her age should never have been exposed to. Thankfully, when Rose turned 18, she was able to get away from her family, go to the nearest bureau branch, get herself registered, and her parents were both arrested for what they were doing to her. Now, of course, that's left a very scarring reminder in the back of her mind of what exactly a non-wielder could do if tempted with the entire magical world at their disposal. But that's not an excuse for her to keep this from Abby, especially when she cares so much about her. So the two agree that in time, eventually, they will find a time to tell Abigail about magic together. Now, coming back over to Rochelle and her court, Doll is continuing with their training, although they are getting a little more hesitant around Rochelle as the days passed. It's just red flags all around with that one now. Doll is not in a very safe space. However, they have found a community with Isaiah and the other vampires, and they've grown very fond of them. There's a genuine connection built between them, so much so that Isaiah has taken to just popping up at Doll's apartment every now and again with food or games or whatever have you. In this particular audio, Doll is working on their magic manipulation and their aura identification, which is a little trickier when you don't really have anybody to practice with. So Isaiah offers to help them practice a bit. He offers them a drop of his blood, and Doll is able to quite literally feel Isaiah's magic. It is something that is tangible to them, something that they can touch and manipulate and amplify or dilute depending on however they try to focus on it. And as Doll is kind of maneuvering around and exploring and figuring out how to work this power, they feel something in the back of Isaiah's mind. And as they nudge at it and prod at it, Isaiah starts to regain memories from his life, from before he was turned. Now, they kind of pull back a bit because they don't know how far they can push and they don't want to do any damage because of it. But Isaiah is amazed. He is absolutely delighted by this. He was so excited that later he goes to find Rochelle and explains what happened and doesn't necessarily realize how unhappy Rochelle seems to be with this development. But Isaiah just keeps going, talking about his family and these memories that haven't been brought up in years. He had a best friend who he hasn't thought about since before he was turned. He completely forgot about them, but he could just almost remember their face. He knows about them now, and maybe this is proof that Doll will be able to turn them human again. And just as Isaiah is so happy to talk about this, suddenly Rochelle pulls him under her trance. Now, in my universe, vampires can't trance other vampires unless they are that vampire's maker. So, it is confirmed in this audio that Rochelle was the one who turned Isaiah and modified his memories so that he doesn't remember it. It is also inferred, though not explicitly confirmed, that Rochelle has done this to every other member of her court. All of these strays that she has picked up over the years were actually just people that she turned and wiped their memory of it ever happening so that she could guide them and be the good Samaritan that took them in when no one else would. While she has Isaiah tranced, she wipes his memory of the best friend, of the family, of ever interacting with Doll at all. And once he is kind of brought back into consciousness, she sends him on his way to get some blood because in his mind, he's just gotten back from a hunt. But it failed and he's hungry now. He was never with Doll. So Rochelle sends him on his way and realizes that she needs to keep Doll on a much tighter leash. So, while Rochelle is off gaslighting, gatekeeping, and girl bossing, moving on. We go back to Glenwood, and with a more of a comfort audio this round, we are now with Measured by Your Seamstress Girlfriend. I also realize I'm really only labeling the audios whenever it's Beth's. But regardless, this is a straight up comfort audio. This is body affirmations. It is nothing but good words and comfort for you and your insecurities. Namely, my insecurities. This audio meant a lot to me. I also went way too heavy on the ASMR quality of the, not quality, quantity, in terms of the actual measuring sounds, because I love measuring ASMR. It's my favorite kind in the world. But my preferences aside, beautiful goes to Beth's job. Didn't mention this before, probably should have. Beth works as a seamstress. She designs clothes. She works at this tailor shop where she, is able to kind of work her craft. So Beautiful swings by her job after working hours, and Beth pulls her in, and while initially she was just going to mend their jacket, she has now decided that they are going to get a completely bespoke outfit. So completely tailored completely tailored to their measurements. She's gonna make them, everything. Because she's Beth. She's not gonna be, limited. So during the audio, Beth measures them, and as she is measuring, they get a little, nervous and a little insecure about the numbers they see on her chart. And she calms them down with some, positive affirmations, some, body affirmations, all that good stuff, because any body is a good body. You have a good body. It's yours, and it is good, and there is no way that it has to look for it to be good. So yeah, just a lot of love and comfort in this audio, and it is a particular favorite of mine. And many others too. So yeah. Not much of a description for that one. Just, if you're ever feeling like how you look isn't quite good enough, this is the audio for you, because it is good enough, and you deserve to hear that it is good enough. Moving on to Evie and Knight. So the two of them are having a delightful evening together. Knight has stopped by to lovingly harass their girlfriend. And while they are being sappy and in love, Knight asks Genevieve if she would be willing to bite them to feed. They were very nervous about it in the beginning, but after some time they've come around to it and they would like to try it at some point. And Evie said yes. She agrees, she would love to, at another point, because she fed just a few hours earlier, so she has no desire to bite anyone. But the two talk about it. They're very excited to kind of have this step in their relationship, especially Evie, who is, this is her first time biting anybody. And she wants to be with someone that she trusts and who trusts her just as much. So yes, these two are making big, big plans for the future. And now, after quite literally months of building it up, we have now come to technically the finale or the climax of Glenwood Season 1. We've hit the pinnacle of the poacher arc. So we have made it to defending your alpha rival. Now the audio starts with 3 poachers. We have Cole, we have Pierce, and we have Stephen Thomas. So these 3 roll up in the middle of the night to the ranger station, and they start pouring gasoline cans and propane tanks all around the foundation. Stephen Thomas talks about, or not Stephen, Stephen talks about lighting the station on fire and pouring gasoline out into the perimeter of the forest, so that as soon as the station goes up, the forest will go up too. While they are all doing this, we cut to the ranger who has set up kind of a security system to get immediate alerts on their phone whenever anything is going on at the station after working hours. So they get an alert and they see on the security footage, they hear Thomas Stevens telling Cole and Pierce that once they're done with the station, they're going to go to the den next. So Ranger gets out of bed, runs out the door, calls Claire, but Claire doesn't pick up. So they're sprinting out the door heading for the station on their own. Now, the reason that Claire didn't pick up her phone was because her and Beth were both on patrol that night, and neither of them were near their phones, which were left at the den. The two of them are shifted, running around the perimeter of their territory when Claire catches a whiff of the gasoline coming from the station. She sends Beth back to the den to call the fire department and to make sure that everyone in the pack is at the den or at home and safe, while Claire runs off to the station. Now, Claire is able to catch the poachers in the act and kind of stops them from, throwing the lighter onto the gasoline. And while Claire is confronting Thomas, I'm going to keep switching back between his first and last name. I'm so sorry. We realize that Stephen Thomas is the open wielder. He is the one who was up in Montana with the first pack, and he is the one who has kind of been leading Cole and Pierce and a third poacher who is still in the hospital because of Ranger, kind of been leading them towards the pack in order to reap the benefits of killing shifters. So Claire and Stevens make threats towards each other that Cole and Pierce kind of don't really understand the gravity of the situation. They're just here to make a quick buck. But eventually Claire lands in a sucker punch and breaks Stevens' nose, effectively getting some of his blood on her hand. Now, unfortunately, this also leads Stevens to ordering Cole and Pierce to take care of Claire, which, very smart plan. Before they can do anything to her, or she can do anything to them, Ranger pulls up with a fucking gun, because I don't know about you, but I think giving the overworked and overly paranoid park ranger a loaded weapon is a great idea. So Ranger shows up and all hell breaks loose. Cole and Stevens, who finally scratch 2 brain cells together, they take off running. Stevens is threatening to blow the station up with the 3 of them still standing there. And eventually Ranger tackles Stevens to the ground, but unfortunately in all of this, Stevens had pulled out a gun of his own, and Ranger is shot point blank in the shoulder. And Claire just sees red. And the non-wielders are gone now, so technically there's nothing stopping her from making every threat she can on Stevens' life. So Stevens panicking now because he realizes that he just shot someone who means a lot to a very angry shifter. And Claire doesn't even have to shift. Because she got Stevens' blood on her, she uses that to subdue his magic. So when he tries to attack her out of desperation, nothing happens. His magic doesn't work. And Claire keeps it that way as she quite literally picks up Stevens' gun and crushes it with her bare hands. I cannot tell you how long it took me to put that goddamn sound effect together. Now, unfortunately, Claire does not rip Stevens limb from limb as much as we all would have enjoyed that. However, she does promise that there is a certain pack in Montana who would love to meet him in person. So while Stevens is left trembling in the dirt, Claire rushes back to Ranger and tries to help set them up and dress their wound. As she's picking them up, suddenly she can't find the Ranger's gun. And just as she turns around, she realizes that Stevens has picked up Ranger's firearm and shoots one of the propane tanks that is sitting against the Ranger station. all at once, the entire building goes up in flames, and Claire and Ranger are flung back, but not before Ranger can fully cover Claire with their body and takes the brunt of the blast. Stevens is severely injured, but is able to go running off into the forest to escape, and Claire is left with a burnt and bleeding Ranger laying limp in her arms. By this point, Beth is able to finally make it back to the ranger station, and the two of them are able to get Ranger into their truck, and the three of them drive back to the den. Before she stepped out of the tree line to confront the poachers, Claire had set up a ward around the ranger station, so for now, the fire won't spread any further into the forest until the fire department gets there to put out the flames. And the audio fades out with Ranger's heartbeat getting slower and slower until they finally pass out. The next audio is from Knight's perspective as Beth calls them up to let them know exactly what's happened. Now, obviously, Knight is at the estate with Genevieve, and there was a giant explosion at the station, so the vampires heard what happened, but no one really knows what's going on exactly. But Beth lets Knight know about the entire situation, keeping them up to date, letting them know that Ranger has been severely burned on their back, and that Claire is working overtime to get ahead of those injuries so that nothing scars over too badly. She tells them to stay at the estate, to wait until they call again, but just keeping them updated so they're not panicking. Right now, none of them know if the firefighters have put out the fires at the station. They don't know if the fire spread into the forest, so it's just better if everyone stays exactly where they are unless they absolutely have to leave. Moving on to checking in on your injured older sister, about a day has passed. They haven't received word on whether the fire has been completely put out, but at some point, Genevieve gets a text from Beth that it's clear for Knight to come back to the den, and Genevieve barely has to read the entire text before Knight is out the door sprinting back for home. Genevieve is also right behind them, but she hangs back for a minute just to let the other vampires know exactly where the two of them will be. So Knight gets back to the den, and Claire is upstairs still keeping watch over Ranger, who is thankfully unconscious while she deals with their injuries, and Claire is not in the best shape. She's also received burns, though not nearly as severe as Ranger, along with several pieces of shrapnel that were stuck in her leg. The pieces of shrapnel are gone, but at some point with her rushing the Ranger upstairs and moving around so much, the wounds have reopened and she has bled through her pant leg. And the second that Knight comes into the room, she just kind of collapses into their arms for a few minutes. The weight of the situation finally hits them both, and they sit together, and Knight is able to work a little bit of healing magic to help close up those last few injuries on Claire's leg, to make sure that she is at the very least in one piece. Claire has been using her blood magic to keep the Ranger alive, and that use of her powers has started to manifest physically on her person. Whenever blood magic is used in excess, or the limits are being pushed, or it's just taking a toll on the magic wielder, the wielder's eyes will start to turn black, almost like the capillaries themselves. The excess of magic starts to bleed through in the eyes, so the whites of the eyes begin to turn black. The pupils are left untouched, but the whites of the eyes turn black, and once that happens, it starts to bleed out into the eyelids and down the corners of the eyes. Additionally, the tips of Claire's fingers have started to turn black from using so much of her magic so constantly to make sure that the Ranger is okay. This is a very jarring way for Knight to see their sister. Yes. If I haven't mentioned it yet, Knight and Claire are adopted siblings. Well, this is why it's a recap. It's a recap for me, too. This. Claire and Knight are adopted siblings. Claire was adopted into the pack and primarily lived with Knight and their parents. So Knight knows that Claire is a blood mage, but has never seen her use her blood magic so heavily. But that doesn't stop them from taking care of her and making sure that she takes care of herself by kicking her ass into the fucking shower. But that's just siblings for you. While all of this is going on at the den, there is still a recovery effort going on at the station itself. And in between getting a call from your pack beta and checking on your injured older sister, there are 2 audios that kind of show what's going on in Glenwood, not related to the shifter pack. We have a chronic pain comfort from your water elemental girlfriend. So Dewdrop does work at the ranger station from time to time, and they have been helping out constantly with the efforts to kind of rebuild the station. It's still standing, most of it is still intact, but there was still a lot of damage done to the area, and Dewdrop has been putting in 150% effort to make sure that things are put back the way they were. But that's been taking a toll on their physical health, and while they deal with chronic pain, Chloe makes them take a break, take a moment for themselves, and just relax for once so they don't completely burn themselves out. And that's kind of a breather, once again, palate cleanser episode in between all of this chaos. And additionally, while all of this destruction is happening on one side of Glenwood, on the opposite side of Glenwood, we have the diner. We check back in with Liza, but not as any of the previous listeners. This is the first audio we have with Sugar. Now, Sugar is a new listener character. They are a vampire and a member of Celine's court, and they have been coming to Celine's diner for a few years now, basically every night, just to flirt with our sweet southern waitress, who, as much as she complains about it, she genuinely does enjoy their company. In this audio, it's the middle of the night. Liza is alone as she's wiping down counters in the diner, and Sugar pops in because they have been out of the country for quite a while, mainly with Celine, who has been out of Glenwood for the last few weeks. So Celine is not here for the entire poacher finale. However, Sugar has not come back empty-handed. They've come with a gift for our dear Liza. In a previous conversation that was held, off-screen, Liza mentioned how she enjoys red wine, so Sugar brings her a vintage bottle of red wine, which is ridiculously expensive, but Liza refuses to hear a price tag. Liza has no knowledge of the magical world, has no idea that Sugar is a vampire, just knows that Sugar apparently has a really good skincare routine, and that's why they haven't gotten a single wrinkle since the first time they met. The two are flirty and have a lot of banter together, and Liza thinks that Sugar is much younger than they actually are, so she doesn't take a lot of their flirting seriously. However, Sugar is nothing if not dedicated, and so far, Liza has been the only person they show this kind of affection to, and they certainly intend to keep it that way. Even if that means wiping down countertops and tables for Liza, just for the chance to spend some quality time with her in the wee hours of the morning. Now, a few more days have passed, the station is now in the reconstruction phases, and the ranger finally wakes up from their injuries. Now, they wake up sporadically throughout the healing process, and they hear Several scenes, namely Beth and Claire talking to each other, Claire trying to heal them, Claire, well, crying over them as the healing starts to not work as effectively. But eventually they do wake up properly, and they listen in on a conversation as Beth gives Claire an update on the whole situation. They hear how reconstruction on the station is going well, how Thomas Stevens has been taken into the bureau custody, bleh, and how the other 3 poachers have all been arrested for their involvement in the arson. Now, as Beth leaves the room, it's now Claire and Ranger, and Claire calls Ranger out for pretending to be asleep and listening in on the conversation. But she's not actually mad, she's just grateful that they're awake. Now, immediately they try to get up, get out of bed, they try to move around, but Claire just pushes them back against the pillows and winds up telling them everything. Everything about magic, about shifters, about how Ranger knew about magic, but their memories were modified so they don't anymore. She tells them absolutely everything and apologizes for not telling them sooner. And during this whole admission, something clicks in the back of Ranger's mind. While Claire was healing them in the beginning, when she was using her blood magic, she had the Ranger's blood on her hands, and that created a blood link, very similarly to when Doll had Isaiah's blood and was able to manipulate the memories in his head. During the healing process, Claire had been able to feel that wall that had been put up in the Ranger's mind, and, well, she'd pushed against it just enough that now that they're awake and Claire was talking about it openly, Ranger remembers magic. They remember its existence, they remember that they were registered as an NWL. All of these memories and facts come rushing back, and they promptly smack Claire with a pillow for joking about admitting the existence of magic to them during the fall festival. So, clearly they're fine. But with all of the memories of magic finally coming back to them, the fact that Claire knew about it and lied is now brought to the forefront of the conversation. And the both of them are exhausted and drained beyond belief. Ranger has every right to be upset that Claire kept this information from them and didn't tell them earlier, just as Claire feels justified that there were bigger priorities to be handled before that could happen. The conversation gets heated, and before the Ranger can get too overwhelmed, Claire apologizes and leaves the room. A little while later, Beth shows up with a tray of foods that the Ranger can finally get something in their stomach, and she just sits with them for a while. She allows them to vent their frustrations about Claire and the whole situation, and fully validates that they have every right to be angry and that she would be furious in their situation. But she also reminds them that Claire had been working for 72 hours straight to make sure that they could be in the condition that they're in now. That the only reason they're alive is because Claire was watching their every breath and making sure that every beat of their heart was consistent and strong. They have every right to be upset, and there is no need for them to forgive her or any of them right away. But they just need to know that anything Claire did, it wasn't out of a lack of care. And Beth also brings up the point that even if Claire went to them and told them about their memory modification as soon as she figured it out, there's no guarantee that Ranger would have believed her. There's a much better chance that they would have thought she was making fun of them than actually trusting her word. But that's not exactly something they have to focus on right now. All they have to focus on is recovering and getting better and hopefully recovering all of their memories, since not everything has fully come back yet. The audio ends with Beth thanking the ranger for keeping Claire safe. And they have no idea the kind of weight that is behind that gratitude. But eventually they're going to find out. And that is the end of the Poacher arc for Glenwood Season 1, and technically the end of the climax of the entire season. But we still have a couple more audios to get through, so we are moving right along to Flirting with Your Podcaster Crush. Abby has officially been upgraded from, podcaster to friend, and now she's a potential love interest for our dear open wielder. So in this audio, Deer comes over to Abby's apartment. They walk in, they start chatting, flirting very heavily. This one was so fun to write and to record. But Deer has actually purchased some of Abby's merchandise from her website for her podcast. So they have a whole big reveal with the trench coat and everything, and turns out they have bought a crop top from Abigail's podcast, and she is just over the moon about it. They're joking around, they're having fun, and clearly Abigail is very much interested in where these conversations are leading. And towards the end, Deer invites Abigail over to Rose's place, because the two of them would like Abby to come over because they have something to discuss. We, as the listeners, know that this is them planning on telling Abigail about magic. Abby just thinks this is a fun hangout and jokes quite accurately about being indoctrinated into a cult. Because she's Abby, and of course she does. So the plan is set in motion to bring Abigail into the world of magic, and we get a little closer to Deer having a more romantic route with Abby as a character, and potentially Rose as well further down the line. Now, while we leave the library trio in their happiness, we are once again returning to Doll in their captivity. It was around this audio, or two audios before, where Rochelle's playlist was altered, that she is no longer your vampire savior, she is your vampire captor. And in this audio, Rochelle finds Doll, and Doll hasn't seen Isaiah in a hot minute. He hasn't been at the apartment, he hasn't been coming to visit, hasn't been in contact with Doll at all. And Rochelle, being ever so kind, explains that after the whole blood link situation with Isaiah sort of starting to grasp his own memories, instead of being excited and wanting to go further and try more, Rochelle tells Doll that Isaiah was severely disturbed by the whole event. He felt uncomfortable, he felt violated, he didn't feel safe around Doll anymore, and naturally, Rochelle does her best to lay the guilt on quite thick. Obviously, Doll feels terrible because they thought this was a good thing. They thought Isaiah had left in good spirits, but according to Rochelle, Isaiah wasn't okay with any of it, and Doll pushed far too hard and did far too much and ended up hurting one of their only friends in this entire place. But Rochelle promises to make it all better and assures them that she will talk to Isaiah and bring them back to the apartment, and it just might be better if Doll doesn't mention the blood link at all. Don't bring up the memory modification. Don't talk to Isaiah about what happened at all. And it'll be fine because Isaiah will do the same, and it's certainly not because he no longer remembers it happened because Rochelle tranced him to forget. Certainly not. So Rochelle has officially kind of dug her claws into Doll a little bit harder and dragged them back away from social interactions with the other vampires. And Doll kind of, pushes for why they are there. Like, what is their purpose here? Why are they training so much to learn about, blood magic and how to, grow in their abilities? And Rochelle confides in them that the reason Doll is there is to help them become human again. Doll is finally brought into the mix, and Rochelle assures them that this is all for the greater good. That the blood mages were working on something incredible in their prime, and that was cut out from under them by vampires. So now, with Rochelle's guidance, Doll is going to carry on that legacy, and in Rochelle's words, they're going to finish what the blood mages started, and they will fix it. So Rochelle is very steadfast in her beliefs, and Doll is quite stuck there for the foreseeable future. So now that everyone's stressed out about Doll, we are now going back to Glenwood, where the characters are stressed. This next audio is a reverse comfort with Beth after the whole poacher situation with the explosion and the immediate recovery effort afterwards. She's been left feeling a lot of anxiety and guilt, especially since this situation has brought up a lot of bad memories pertaining to the Alexander situation. There's a very deep-seated fear that Beth is never there when it matters. She's never there in time. She's always just a few paces too late, like with Alexander, and now with this, Beth was barely halfway to the ranger station when it exploded, and when she heard the gunfire, she didn't realize that the ranger was there with Claire. She thought Claire was unarmed, alone with 3 individuals who had weapons on them, and she was terrified that when she would finally get to the station, it wouldn't go nearly as well as last time. So she's just feeling a lot of these almost survivor guilt, in a way, and Beautiful kind of talks her down and helps her see this from a different perspective, and eventually suggests her talking to Night about the whole thing, since they feel very similarly. Now, unfortunately, Beth and Night haven't really talked things out about the whole event, both Alexander and the poachers, because they feel like their own guilt is preventing them from putting that on the other. So Night feels guilty that they weren't there in time, and they don't want to talk to Beth about it and put that on her shoulders. And Beth feels guilty about not being there in time, and she doesn't want to put that on Night's shoulders. Not only that, but Beth wasn't exactly the kindest person to Night whenever the whole Alexander thing was going down. So she feels like talking to Night would be like a slap in the face. Like, she wasn't there for them back then, so there is no need for them to be there for her now. When in reality, they both love each other and they both care about each other's well-being. So Seer finally manages to convince Beth to just swallow her pride, go have a private moment with Night, so the two of them can just talk all of these things out and finally get all this stuff off their chest. So we love healthy communication amongst our werewolves. But this was obviously a weight taken off of Beth's shoulders and something that she needed to kind of talk out with somebody for the first time. With a lot of the shifters in the pack, a lot of them have this mindset of they were there during the whole Alexander situation. They were there during the trial. They were there during their recovery. So there's no need to talk about it now, years later, when in reality, all of them should be talking about this. They should all just have a big open discussion about it, because there's a lot of stuff that's been left unsaid, or things that people, assumed would be inferred that weren't. The shit's gotta be talked out, point blank, explicitly. So now that that's kind of been settled, we are once again with Night and Genevieve, and this is probably going to be the shortest description because this audio is labeled 18+. And I don't know how much I can talk about it, so I don't want to risk it. But this is the audio where Knight and Evie finally have a moment together after all of the chaos has settled, and Genevieve finally bites Knight and feeds from them for the first time. It is very exciting. This is very obviously a allegory for, first times with your partner. It's not subtle in the least. But this is a very fun audio to do. But yeah, they finally have this moment together, and it's wonderful. It goes very well, and it is just kind of reaffirmed that these two could not be more in love with each other. And we love that for them. Now, moving back with the pack, it was a very shifter-heavy month in July. We are once again at the den with Claire and the Ranger. Now, while the Ranger was healed predominantly in those first few days after the explosion, there is still more internal injuries that need to be addressed over a longer period of time. They experienced severe third-degree burns on their back, some very deep lacerations from the shrapnel from the propane tanks and from the building quite literally exploding. So while Claire was able to heal their skin and the, flesh wounds, essentially, there is still the risk of, because it was so hot, their cartilage could have been damaged. So for the last few weeks, she has been having them come to the den and doing routine healing sessions with them. Mostly because since Ranger still doesn't have all of their memories and their NWL license would just kind of cause, complications, they haven't gone to a professional healer. But it's okay because Claire does have healing abilities, as we have seen. So while the Ranger hasn't completely forgiven Claire for the whole lying situation, they still agree to come to the den every now and again to have these healing sessions, even though it's pretty clear they're still not in the best state to be driving back and forth. Because of this, Claire offers for Ranger to stay at the den, full time. Not forever, but just until they are fully healed and until their memories have been fully reinstated. Obviously, Ranger is a little hesitant about this because, the whole situation, but it does make sense for them to just stay there instead of stressing themselves out trying to drive back and forth and risk putting any strain on their injuries. And plus, if their memories do come back at random and they are suddenly thrown into a situation where, they get overwhelmed or they can't handle all of these new memories, it's better to be at the den with a bunch of wielders who are able to kind of handle the situation rather than being left home alone where the only people they have in their contacts are non-wielders who wouldn't know what to do. Not only that, but Claire makes an inference that if the Ranger is worried about having nightmares around the pack, they are not the only one. And there are plenty of people in the pack who have dealt with nightmares for quite a long time, so they would not be alone in that. Eventually, the Ranger does agree to move into the den until further notice. And although Claire offers to help them move their stuff, they decline because they're still, taking steps into forgiving her, and she backs off immediately. But now I don't have to keep making up bullshit reasons to get them in the same room together because now they're roommates. And that was just a good chunk of the comment section for that audio was just people using the Vine quote of, "Oh my god, they were roommates." So while Ranger is moving into the den, Beth and Seer have been talking about moving in together themselves, and this has been a long time coming. But before that happens, in this next audio, Beth sits Beautiful down, and we once again have a wonderful confession of feelings and dedication and devotion. and Beth asks Beautiful if they would be her mate. Now, when it comes to mates in my universe, it's not the typical werewolf mate of you see them across the room and suddenly it's the red string and that's your person, you're destined together, whether or not you know each other. With shifters in my universe, mates are chosen. So if you are with somebody that you feel that you are devoted to, someone that you have chosen, this is your human. This is your person. This is the one that you want to spend the rest of your life with. You can choose them as your mate. And if they choose you as their mate as well, then you kind of come out publicly to the pack, you announce your mateship, and it's kind of officialized by, the announcement. But if one person still hasn't chosen you as the mate, then it kind of stays under wraps until both agree to come forward publicly. Now, obviously, Beautiful says yes, and the two are now properly mated. They'll be making an announcement to the pack very shortly, even though pretty much everyone already assumes that the two of them were going to choose each other as mates. And this was the first audio that was a preview for further content that is only on Patreon. So this was a kind of a fade-out moment as Beth and Beautiful consummated the courtship, you could say. So after this all goes down, a little bit of time passes, and we finally get to the day Abby comes over to Rose's place where Deer is waiting, and the three of them kind of sit down, and Abigail finally gets to meet Excalibur, and she immediately falls in love with him. He takes a very quick liking to her. He comes out of the cage, or enclosure, not cage, enclosure. And Abigail is just on cloud nine. She is so happy. She has a little bundle of scales in her arms. She is surrounded by her two best friends. She's having the time of their life. And, Deer and Rose tell Abby about magic. They try to explain that magic exists, and at first, unfortunately, Abigail doesn't believe them. She thinks they're joking with her. She thinks that they're kind of messing with her because, oh yeah, she has a podcast about magic and cryptids. Yeah, very funny. But the more that the open wielder and Rose kind of push that they're not joking, Abby starts to get a little more defensive because now it feels like they're just making fun of her. And the more that Abby is getting defensive, Deer is getting more desperate, so eventually they just show Abby magic. Just put a light show in the palm of their hands, and Abigail freaks out. She does not know what's going on. Rose has to kind of wrangle both of them in, and eventually has to put Excalibur back in his enclosure because Abby's in panic mode for a couple seconds. So Rose and Deer once again try to explain that magic is real. It is real, it is tangible. Both Rose and Deer have it. And the second that Abby comes to terms with the fact that they're not joking and they're not lying to her, the podcaster comes out and she is just going a mile a minute asking question after question after question. And she bounces back from the fact that Rose and Deer have been lying to her for the last year. She bounces back very quick from that because there's magic. She has questions. She needs answers, and that takes the priority over anything else. So, luckily, Rose is able to kind of slip into Deer's mind and just be like, she's incredibly happy that it's gone as well as it is. And Rose can also tell that Deer has feelings for Abby. Just like Abby clocked in a few audios previously that Deer has feelings for Rose. So now it's that, love triangle that's not necessarily a love triangle because eventually it's going to be a love circle. But, so yeah. that audio was also very fun to make. But Abby officially knows about magic. She is going to fill out the paperwork to become a licensed non-wielder liaison. And now she really is never going to leave the library once she realizes that so many books in there were just glamored. And she now has access to an entire library full of magical literature. So Rose is going to have to officially get like an IKEA bed built in the back rooms of the library so that Abby can just crash there for the rest of her life. Speaking of NWLs, we are once again back at the Den for the very last audio in the Glenwood playlist so far. This is consulted and teased by a flirty vampire prime. So Beth is at the Den, and Ranger has just come back from work. They have been attending all of these reconstruction meetings and all of this stuff going on with the station. And Beth lets them know that someone is coming in to help Ranger with their memories. Now, instead of letting the memories kind of just bombard them at random, they have brought in a memory modification specialist who will be able to kind of bring those memories up to the forefront all at once, or kind of, stagger them out. Now, obviously, the Ranger is incredibly excited about this, despite the fact that the specialist is a vampire, but the desire to have their memories fully back is just too strong to be overshadowed by any nervousness. And plus, this person comes highly recommended from Celine herself and is a personal friend of the pack. So just as Beth is trying to give Ranger kind of a warning about what they're getting into, Claire returns back to the Den with the specialist, and we are introduced to Valera Ancienne, who is the Vampire Prime, which the pack has been doing blood deals with for the last few months. And Valera is nothing short of a proper Parisian flirt. The first few sentences are her teasing Beth about getting into her bed and getting into Claire's bed, and she is just a wild time who drives Claire absolutely nuts. But Claire wouldn't trust this to anyone else, so after Beth kind of runs out of the room to give them all some privacy, the three of them go into the living room. Valera and Ranger sit down on a couch together. And Valera calms down. As flirty and outrageous as she can be, she understands the gravity of the situation, and she wants the Ranger to know that she will go at their pace. This is for their comfort, and whatever they want to do, she will follow. At first, Claire is very on edge with all the flirtations and making sure that Valera does her job, but eventually she settles down and she offers to leave the room, but Ranger asks if Claire will stay. Of course, Claire says yes, and the process begins. Valera just needs one drop of blood to create the blood link, and, they get at it. Ranger kind of loses consciousness at some point just because their head's being quite literally fucked around with. But when they wake up, Valera assures them that whatever wall had been put up on their memories is completely gone, and that she has set up a wall of her own in their mind. So this wall is to be taken down piece by piece over time to let the memories slowly seep through at a pace that Ranger sets and that Ranger feels comfortable with. But Valera will not leave until the memories are completely reinstated, however long that might take. And while she has offered to do it for free, it's revealed that Claire is also giving Valera payment in form of meals. So Claire is offering up her blood to Valera in exchange for these services, and Ranger gets a little protective. They're a little worried that Claire is putting herself out there when she's uncomfortable, when in reality this is not the first time that her and Valera have had, exchanges, be it blood or, otherwise. But she's doing this for Ranger, and that couldn't be a more noble cause in her eyes at this moment. So after all of the memory modification has begun, Ranger needs some time to rest and recuperate before the next session. So Claire kicks Valera's ass up the stairs to her bedroom for the evening. And as she's about to leave, Ranger pulls her back down towards the couch and asks about Claire being a blood mage. Claire promises that she will explain all of that to them later. She will tell them whatever they want to know. There are no more secrets now between them. But that has to happen at a later time when they're not post-memory modification. And Ranger asks if Claire will stay with them until they fall asleep. And she does. The very end of this audio, we fade out from Claire and Ranger, and it is now a few hours later after Claire has made her payments with Valera, and Valera is now alone in her bedroom, and she makes a call to Celine. Now, Celine is still out of the country, but Valera keeps her up to date with the pack and all that, and we learn that Valera has a history with both Celine and her wife Lydia, and Valera has been added to the long, long list of people who just want Claire and Ranger to get together. And that is officially where we left off before Alternate Universe August began. That was the very last Glenwood audio, so the recap is finished. We finally made it after 3 whole hours. Oh my god. We did it. We did it. Whew. If you have listened through this whole thing, congratulations. If you have just been kind of skipping around to specific audios to catch up on what you missed, wonderful. This was a lot of fun. I genuinely didn't think I made so much shit. Certainly not 3 hours and 6 minutes worth of it. But here we are. We did it. And now we are on to season 2. So that will be debuting shortly after this audio. Thank you guys so much for sticking around through all of this content, all of these plots, these characters, all of the nonsense that happens behind the scenes with me. It truly means the world to me. I feel like I say this every time I'm out of character, but words can't describe my gratitude for you guys, for the support you show, for the love that you show. It is beyond words, and it just makes my heart so full every time I see you guys get excited about what's to come. I love the theorizing, the headcanons, the fan art, the fan fiction, oh my god, all of it. I never thought I would be making a recap of the first season of my story. I didn't think there'd be a first season. But yeah, it's just humbling and so amazing that I get to do this and I get to share my stories and my characters with you guys. So, once again, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for joining. If you're an old listener, if you're just coming into the fandom, welcome. I am so happy to have you here with us, and I really hope you guys enjoy what we've got coming next. I've got a lot of stuff planned, and I hope you're there for all of it. So, as always, get yourself some water, have a good meal, get some rest, and I will see you guys in the next audio. Thank you all so much.